Hello there. Tonight, we're not going to talk about continents drifting or ice ages thawing. Instead, we're going to look beneath our feet and ask something that quietly tilts the mind. What if Earth wasn't round at all? What if somehow it was flat? I don't mean a perfectly polished disk spinning through space like a coin, nor do I mean mythical realms on the edge of the world. I mean a world subtly, gently flat its horizons, stretching wider than we imagine, its edges touching mysteries we've never seen. Picture this. You are standing at the center of a vast plain. The air is soft, almost motionless, carrying the faint scent of soil and distant water. The horizon curves not in a gentle arc, but as a subtle plateau that seems to extend endlessly. Sunlight glances off a shimmering lake somewhere far away. Birds circle, but they don't arc into distance, they glide in wide, seemingly straight paths, the sky unusually spacious above them. Everything feels familiar, yet just slightly off. The landscape is a puzzle, quiet but insistent, inviting you to question everything you thought you knew about the ground beneath your feet. Maybe you're listening late at night, the hum of your home, the only companion, or perhaps your lights are dim, your day already tucked into a small box, and you're ready to wander slowly through a world that is equal parts strange and calming. Funny, isn't it? The idea of a flat Earth is both ancient and absurd, yet here we are, exploring it together, seconds and miles apart, yet somehow sharing this same quiet curiosity. Before we drift any further, dim your lights if you can, settle into your chair or bed, and take a slow breath. Let your thoughts stretch as wide as this imagined horizon. Could rivers really flow straight forever? Could wind spiral in circles only to return to its origin, tracing invisible paths along an unbent plain? Could civilizations have built on a world that was flat, where maps curved differently, and stars moved in arcs that made no sense to modern astronomers? And what about you? Would you dare walk to the edge, if there was one? And so, before we can explore what this flat world might look like, and how life, thought, and wonder would have navigated it, we need to step back to where it begins. The question itself, the gentle tilt of possibility that suggests our assumptions, even the ones we hold most firmly, might be nothing more than a comforting illusion. Imagine standing at a place where the land seems to stretch flat, unbroken, all the way to a horizon that doesn't bend. The wind here is calm, yet insistent, whispering across plains that seem to have no end. Water flows, but somehow differently, as if aware of the gentle, infinite horizon. Could a traveler have felt awe or fear here, staring into the impossible openness? Let's start by noticing the ground beneath your feet. It feels firm, but slightly strange, like the earth has been flattened with invisible hands, smooth yet textured, with tiny cracks that hint at movement far below. Your shoes press lightly into a soil that smells faintly of rain, of wet clay, and a hint of something metallic, like coins left in a riverbed. Each step seems to echo, though no one else is around, the sound scattering across the endless plain, bouncing like whispers of a secret that refuses to stay hidden. The horizon stretches wider than a city skyline, yet it is completely silent, like a world waiting for a signal that never comes. You notice small flowers, stubborn and low, dotting the earth in tiny bursts of color. They look almost impossible here, bright against the muted beige of the flat plains. And in the distance, a river snakes straight and deliberate, not meandering as you expect, its surface catching sunlight in thin, dazzling lines. Boots on sand, light on land, shadows stretch like a painter's hand. You realize that even the air has its own rhythm, soft and slow, moving as if it knows your thoughts. The smell of wet stone rises in gentle spirals. A bird swoops in a straight line, as if following an invisible ruler, wings glinting in a sunlight that does not curve. Clouds drift low, long ribbons stretching across the sky, casting shadows that slide across the plains like slow-moving thoughts. Sometimes, you feel as though the horizon itself is breathing, expanding just a little with each inhale of the wind. Your mind begins to stretch with it, imagining rivers that flow straight for days, trees that grow in line like soldiers standing quietly, and mountains that rise not in peaks but as flat expanses, as if the earth has been ironed smooth. Water moves with gentle grace, bending slightly, yet always in line, mirroring a sky that doesn't tilt or arc. Sunlight spills across the plain in long sheets, highlighting the gentle bumps of hidden rocks and the faint glitter of minerals embedded in the soil. You think of modern absurdities, like skyscrapers built for small, curved earths, and wonder how they would appear here, maybe leaning precariously, or perhaps flattened like pancakes in a cosmic griddle. Every shadow is slightly exaggerated, long lines stretching past where your eye can track. The wind carries soft scents of grass, dust, and something tangentially like coffee brewing somewhere in a future city that doesn't exist yet. Clouds drift slow, sun on snow, shadows grow, rivers flow. Animals move differently here too. Birds fly in elongated arcs. Foxes pad softly across lines that seem to guide them in straight paths, and deer seem to hesitate at edges that feel infinite. Even insects crawl in surprisingly orderly patterns, leaving trails that could be mistaken for miniature highways. The sheer vastness encourages small, absurd thoughts. Could someone have gotten lost here, wandering for days without realizing the curvature they expected was absent? Could an ancient cartographer have spent lifetimes trying to map this expanse, only to realize the world itself had its own stubborn logic? Every small rock, every tuft of grass feels intentional, like punctuation in a language you almost understand. Wind through grass, sky so vast, horizon wide, time moves past. As the sun slowly tilts lower, long shadows stretch like ancient memories, making the plain appear even larger. Tiny movements, and insects crawl, a ripple in the river, become monumental, emphasizing the scale of the flat land around you. The flatness creates a subtle tension, an odd mix of calm and curiosity, as if the earth is inviting you to wander and at the same time whispering, "Don't go too far." The quiet is profound, occasionally interrupted by a bird or a distant rustle, reminding you that life persists even in impossible landscapes. The wind changes slightly, brushing past your face, carrying both the scent of distant water and the faint, unplaceable hint of something like nostalgia. Rocks and dust, plains so wide, rivers gleam, skies collide. In this place, your mind wanders as easily as your feet. Thoughts drift toward the absurd. What would cities look like here, stretched into lines instead of curves? How would mountains have been climbed, rivers forded, or stories told when horizons didn't bend? You feel both small and enormous at the same time, like a tiny observer of a world built for dreaming rather than doing. And yet, the calm persists, a gentle insistence that encourages you to breathe slowly, to walk slowly, and to consider the strange poetry of a flat world. Line of trees, sky of blue, whispers hum, thoughts renew. As the day fades, shadows lengthen further, and the horizon holds steady. You feel the rhythm of this impossible landscape, slow and unyielding. For now, you are at the edge of the world, somewhere between curiosity and quiet reflection. A traveler in a land that seems both absurd and perfectly serene. The flatness invites meditation, wonder, and even a smile as you imagine life and thought unfolding here in gentle, unbroken lines. Picture a sunrise spilling across a land that rises slightly, almost imperceptibly, but never arcs into a sphere. The colors stretch endlessly. Birds skim in straight lines, shadows flatten, and distances deceive the eye. Would early wanderers have believed the world itself was simpler or infinitely more mysterious? Let's drift forward a little, imagining yourself standing on this plain, the air crisp and tinged with the faint scent of earth warmed by morning light. The ground beneath your feet is uneven in tiny, almost imperceptible ways, like the gentle wrinkles of a sheet that has been smoothed but not perfectly pressed. Each blade of grass catches the early sunlight differently, shimmering in a symphony of muted golds and greens. Your ears pick up the soft whisper of wind over the land, carrying with it the faint, distant calls of animals waking to the day. Even the dust seems purposeful, suspended in streaks that catch the light and exaggerate the flatness stretching before you. Water glimmers in shallow pools, reflecting the sky as if it were a sheet of glass. Ripples form straight, almost geometrical lines, echoing the flat horizon. There is a rhythm to this landscape, slow and patient, as if the earth itself has decided that nothing will curve too quickly, that every edge, every slope, exists to draw the eye forward without the comfort of a bend. You imagine travelers here, early wanderers with nothing but instincts and simple tools, following these cues, learning the language of straight lines and endless vistas. Could they have felt the same quiet awe you do now? A mix of curiosity, suspicion, and perhaps delight. Lines of sun, light begun, shadows stretch, rivers run. Every object seems subtly distorted by the flatness. Rocks that would appear rounded elsewhere cast long, thin shadows, stretching farther than logic should allow. Trees lean just a touch, compelled by prevailing winds and gravity, but the land beneath them does not curve to accommodate. The sun rises in a deliberate, slow sweep, its path perfectly linear across the sky, emphasizing the impossibility of curvature. Birds glide, tracing invisible paths that seem mathematically precise, almost as if the sky has been measured and plotted for their convenience. You watch one hover above a pond, wings angled to catch the light, reflection mirrored in a perfect, straight line. Clouds drift, sky so wide, wind that bends, nowhere to hide. Shadows flatten across the grass, stretching like sheets of parchment pressed against the ground. Small animals, foxes, hares, and lizards move cautiously, following natural lines in the landscape that are both guides and boundaries. The distant hills rise ever so slightly, a gentle promise of relief for tired feet, yet they never form a dome or arc. Everything feels deliberately elongated, a quiet exaggeration of scale that tricks the eye and mind alike. You might find yourself imagining cityscapes or villages stretched into long lines, roads marching straight toward the horizon, chimneys smoking in unison along perfectly measured streets. Even the stars, when night eventually arrives, will appear subtly shifted, their familiar patterns flattened in a sky that obeys a different geometry. Rivers gleam, paths align, winds that hum, fields that shine. The sun continues its linear sweep, scattering warmth across the plain. Rocks catch the light in unexpected ways, highlighting subtle mineral veins, ancient sediment, and traces of life long gone. The air smells faintly of damp soil, warmed stone, and a distant trace of smoke from a far-off fire that has yet to be discovered. You notice that every subtle undulation, every shallow depression, contributes to the illusion of endless flatness. Even the distant horizon, where the land seems to meet the sky, wavers only slightly, teasing your perception, bending just enough to suggest depth without offering curvature. Grass so straight, sky so wide, shadows play, rivers glide. Imagine sitting down here for a moment, letting the flat expanse wrap around you. You can hear the faint hum of insects, the distant chatter of birds, the wind brushing across grasses taller than you might expect. The calm invites reflection. How would early humans have navigated such a world? How would they have told stories about edges that never curved, distances that tricked the mind, and skies that felt infinitely vast? Perhaps myths emerged, tales of lands beyond sightlines, of horizons that stretched forever, promising adventures and secrets to those brave enough to follow. Light stretches, time moves slow, winds that drift, rivers flow. By mid-morning, the entire plain is illuminated, revealing a world simultaneously familiar and strange. The gentle rise of the land provides depth, yet every straight line reminds you of the flat reality beneath your feet. You feel a quiet intimacy with the land, a conspiratorial sense that the earth itself has shared a secret, revealing geometry that escapes casual notice. And as you breathe, you notice the rhythm of your heart, sinking to the quiet pulse of this elongated landscape, the stretch of sunlight, the precise hum of wind, the calm insistence of a world without curves. Horizons wide, skies that bend, thought extends, senses mend. In this flattened world, every movement, every glance becomes a meditation. The morning stretches before you, inviting gentle curiosity, thoughtful observation, and even amusement at the oddity of imagining cities, rivers, and mountains perfectly straight. You can feel both small and expansive, a part of the landscape, and yet floating above it in quiet contemplation. The horizon waits patiently, unbending, holding space for the wanderer, the thinker, and the dreamer alike. Imagine waves moving in a perfect line, their rhythm steady, reaching toward a horizon that never curves. The salt tang is sharp, the sea breeze unrelenting. Mariners would need new rules to navigate a water world without a globe, relying on instinct more than compasses. What stories would such travelers tell upon returning? Let's drift closer to the edge of this endless sea. The water glints in a uniform shimmer, stretching straight, as if the ocean itself were a polished floor, not subject to the gentle bulge of a globe. Each wave rises and falls with patient precision, a quiet rhythm that hypnotizes the eye. Spray catches sunlight, forming fleeting ribbons of color that vanish before you can follow them. The scent of salt hangs heavy in the air, mingled with a hint of seaweed, damp wood, and the faint trace of rain from clouds drifting lazily overhead. The horizon is uncompromising, unwavering, a boundary that exists only in theory, because the ocean itself refuses to bend. Waves line, shine and curl. Sunlight gleams, spray does swirl. You imagine early sailors here, wooden vessels rocking gently, sails straining against the straight pull of wind. Maps offer little help, they are curved in expectation, but the water has its own rules. Every instinct matters, the smell of sea, the feel of currents, the behavior of birds flying just above the waves. A gull dips low, skimming along a straight path, wings cutting a perfect line over the water's surface. Fish break the surface in long, linear arcs, scales reflecting the sun like shards of glass. There is an absurdity here. Of course, modern sailors might check GPS or compass apps, but in this flat ocean, those tools would mislead, and only intuition guides survival. Spray so white, currents tight, fish leap far, gulls take flight. The rhythm of the waves becomes almost meditative. The ocean breathes slowly, inhaling and exhaling, each pulse echoing in the hull of a boat. The sound is constant yet calming, a low, unending hum that merges with the wind. The seabed, where glimpses through shallow water allow, stretches flat and unbroken, sand and rock forming patterns that would be invisible on a curved earth. Seaweed drifts in lazy, straight lines, pulled gently by unseen currents, while small fish dart in synchrony, as though following invisible rulers. The smell of brine is pungent yet comforting, a reminder that life thrives even when the world defies expectation. Currents pull, tides so tall, waves march straight, seagulls call. Even distant islands behave differently here. Their shores appear as perfect rectangles, cliffs rising sharply without the usual subtle curvature. Beaches run straight for miles, sand packed and unbroken, shells scattered in linear patterns. The sound of waves crashing against rocks forms an even rhythm, more like a metronome than a random pattern. You might imagine the absurdity. Explorers returning home, telling tales of straight oceans, rectangular islands, and sunsets that don't dip behind curves. Modern listeners would raise eyebrows, laugh quietly, but here, in this flat world, it makes perfect sense. Salt and spray, wind and sway, endless blue, night and day. Above, clouds slide in long, slow ribbons, casting linear shadows across the surface. The sun glints off water, highlighting tiny ripples that move in tandem with the main waves. Even the horizon has a surreal perfection, a straight line stretching to infinity, making it difficult to judge distance or scale. A lone mariner might feel both small and grand, floating on a sea that challenges perception while inviting reflection. The monotony is oddly comforting, teaching patience, rhythm, and respect for forces beyond human control. Horizons wide, sails held tight, waves that shine, gulls in flight. Consider the subtle humor that early sailors might have felt. Their maps were useless, their expectations overturned. Perhaps they joked about the absurdity of a world that refuses curves, spun tall tales in taverns about islands that stretch forever, or waters that run straight as ribbons of silk. And yet, every tale is grounded in truth, in the logic of this flat ocean, where intuition, observation, and patience matter more than instruments or calculations. Each day is a lesson, each sunrise a reminder that the rules of the world are slightly, delightfully, askew. Ribbons gleam, currents stream, clouds drift slow, waves do flow. As the day progresses, the ocean reflects the shifting light, colors blend and extend, water mirroring the sky with unusual clarity. The flat horizon makes the sun appear to move in long, straight arcs, a path that confounds expectation yet feels perfectly natural. Ships appear smaller and larger simultaneously, distances deceiving the eye in subtle, endless ways. You might lean against a rail, inhaling deeply, feeling the rhythm of the waves in your chest, imagining the lives of countless explorers who learned to read the water as if it were a book. Every splash, Every ripple, every distant bird, is part of a language only understood by those who move slowly, observe closely, and let the absurdity of this flat world sink in gently, like a lullaby, whispered across the waves. Shorelines stretch, sun and sky, waves march on, gulls fly high. In this linear ocean, time seems both compressed and expanded. Minutes stretch like waves, yet the horizon never changes, reminding you that in this flat world, perception is everything. The sea invites patience, reflection, and imagination, encouraging both quiet contemplation and the absurdly poetic thought that somewhere, explorers are sailing straight to horizons that may never end. Rocks rise, not as domes, but as elongated plateaus. The wind cuts across their tops, carrying the scent of moss and cold stone. Hikers, explorers, or wandering animals would encounter edges that seem to extend forever, yet remain approachable. Could legends have sprung from this subtle strangeness? Let's walk closer, imagining your feet pressing gently against a firm, uneven surface. Each step releases a soft crunch of gravel and small stones, the texture both reassuring and slightly alien. The air is crisp, carrying hints of pine, lichen, and wet rock that have absorbed centuries of rain. Sunlight filters across the flat tops, highlighting subtle depressions and tiny ridges, as if the earth itself were running its fingers over a vast sheet of parchment. Insects scuttle through the sparse grass, their tiny movements echoing in the stillness, while birds glide just above the plateau, wings spread wide, tracing straight paths across the open sky. The horizon seems impossibly far, stretching into a distance that challenges comprehension. Plateaus rise, skies that bend, shadows long, rivers send. You notice the wind slicing past like a thin blade, cold and insistent, carrying whispers of unseen valleys below. The scent of damp moss is strong, earthy, almost intoxicating, reminding you of forest floors and hidden streams. Every plateau edge feels deliberate, like nature's own terraces carved not by accident, but by patient, invisible hands. Distant cliffs rise in gentle lines, not peaks, suggesting a landscape designed to elongate perception. Small animals, foxes and goats perhaps, traverse the edges with careful, precise steps. Their paths are linear, predictable, yet filled with subtle surprises. A sudden outcrop, a tiny pool, a patch of moss soft enough to sink a paw, rocks and moss, wind and gloss, sun so high, clouds that toss. Imagine explorers here centuries ago, perhaps early humans, mapping these elongated forms. They would have wondered whether the land itself stretched toward infinity, testing courage, patience, and endurance. Every ridge and depression would offer a story, a legend of a giant walking across the plain, a tale of spirits guarding the cliffs, or a simple observation: flatness can deceive. Even modern travelers, accustomed to rounded peaks and rolling hills, would feel a subtle disorientation. Distances feel longer, heights lower, and the mind works harder to reconcile the familiar with the unfamiliar. Edges long, shadows strong, animals roam, breezes song. The sunlight shifts slowly as the day moves forward. Shadows grow thin and elongated, mirroring the plateau's geometry. Tiny streams trickle along narrow channels, their paths almost perfectly straight, reflecting the sky above. You might notice a tiny bird hopping along a flat ledge, each step precise, deliberate, as if acknowledging the unusual logic of its home. Wind whistles through depressions, carrying faint echoes from distant cliffs. creating a symphony that feels both natural and carefully orchestrated. The plateau stretches both ways, endlessly approachable, yet subtly intimidating, hinting that the world is wider, flatter, and slower than the mind expects. Cliffs so wide, skies collide, shadows fall, animals glide. Consider the subtle humor of imagining hikers here with modern hiking gear, GPS, trekking poles, and energy bars trying to navigate this landscape that refuses typical curves. Distances appear shorter or longer depending on angle and light. Modern explorers would likely pause repeatedly, exhaling slowly, marveling at the improbability of nature's design. Perhaps they'd leave markers or sketches, little reminders that even in the flatness, life moves in curves of its own. Small cairns of stones might be built along straight edges, signaling passage for others who wander here, adding human echoes to the quiet architecture of the plateau. Wind cuts sharp, moss is damp, birds drift slow, waters lamp. Animals thrive here in their own steady patterns. Goats and sheep navigate the ledges with precision, balancing as though aware of the infinite horizon. Raptors glide low, wings slicing the air, scouting for prey below. Insects hug moss and stone, finding shelter in tiny cracks and hollows. Life adapts to the flat heights, moving efficiently, respecting the long edges and straight plains. You might imagine ancient humans tracking prey here, learning to respect linear paths, using elongated ridges as guides for hunting, navigation, and storytelling. Each step, each observation becomes part of a quiet rhythm shared across generations. Ridges stretch, skies so near, shadows fade, waters clear. As evening approaches, light softens. The plateau glows in muted golds and greys. Long shadows stretch far, emphasizing the flat, linear character of the land. Distant cliffs are outlined sharply, reflections in tiny pools perfect, mirroring sky and plateau alike. The wind slows, the world settles, and a sense of calm dominates. You feel both small and expansive, part of a vast geometry that invites contemplation, humor, and awe simultaneously. Perhaps legends really did emerge here, born of subtle strangeness, guiding imagination and memory for centuries to come. Sun dips low, shadows grow, wind whispers soft, stories flow. In this flat, plateaued world, time moves gently. Every ridge, every ledge, every subtle change in rock or moss invites patience and attention. Standing here, you are connected to explorers, animals, and the earth itself. The horizon waits patiently, flat and unending, for those willing to wander, observe, and imagine. The sun traces a path, but not quite as expected. Stars move differently at night, yet patterns remain comforting, familiar enough to guide, strange enough to wonder. Did ancient eyes notice, or did humans simply adjust, dreaming in the quiet geometry of a flat world? Let's lift our gaze slowly, letting the early morning sun spill across the plains. The light stretches, almost linear, across hills and plateaus, illuminating textures in ways that seem deliberate, as though the world is teasing your perception. Shadows fall differently here, longer, straighter, exaggerating the flatness beneath your feet. The wind is subtle but persistent, carrying scents of distant water, moss, and stone, warmed by sunlight. Birds glide in straight, deliberate lines, wings cutting the air like precise rulers, their calls echoing softly over the plains. Even the clouds drift in paths that seem predetermined, long ribbons drifting silently across a sky that feels unusually spacious. Sunlight bends, sky extends, shadows reach, horizon sends. The horizon itself behaves oddly. It is unbroken, flat, stretching further than the eye expects, yet somehow familiar. You might notice the subtle shimmer of heat rising from the earth, creating a mirage-like effect that tricks your perception of distance. Ancient humans likely observed these patterns, adjusting instinctively to a sky that doesn't curve. Perhaps they traced the sun's path daily, measured shadows along straight lines, and invented ways to predict time without assuming a spherical world. Their calendars, rituals, and stories might have all emerged from this subtle flatness, an invisible scaffold upon which imagination and survival intertwined. Stars appear, move in line, constellations bend, patterns shine. As night falls, the stars themselves seem subtly altered. Orion, the Pleiades, and the Big Dipper, familiar to us, now trace arcs that feel slightly stretched, flattened, unusual, yet readable. Constellations appear as if draped across a flat canopy, prompting quiet reflection and perhaps the gentle anxiety of human curiosity. How to navigate, how to imagine a world beyond, how to make sense of movement that defies expectation. Ancient eyes adjusted naturally, dreaming under the stars, quietly memorizing the rhythms of this subtly altered universe. The moon follows a long, low trajectory, bathing plateaus, plains, and rivers in gentle silver light. Moon glides low, stars align. Night is calm, thoughts entwine. Imagine standing on a hill, looking at distant skylines. Buildings or natural formations rise, but without curved exaggeration. Edges and ridges are distinct, sharply outlined against the straight horizon. The play of light and shadow here would feel subtly off, unfamiliar yet strangely compelling. Shadows cast by trees, rocks, and cliffs stretch farther, echoing the geometry of the flat landscape. Early humans, walking quietly among these shadows, might have sensed the world's gentle divergence from expectation, a quiet conspiratorial secret that only perceptive observers could detect. Shadows stretch, light does bend, edges straight, horizons blend, wind rustles through treetops and grasses. Sounds travel differently in this geometry. Echoes seem linear, bouncing softly across the unbroken expanse. Small animals scurry along the plains, aware of the unusual visual cues. Birds returning to nests trace straight lines across open air, while nocturnal creatures emerge, their movements guided by familiar rhythms of stars and terrain. The flatness subtly dictates behavior, shaping navigation, hunting, and daily patterns. Sky so wide, stars abide. Wind whispers low, shadows guide. Humans likely built myths around this geometry, legends of horizons that never end, tales of skies that arc incorrectly, stories of spirits guiding the straight paths of birds. Perhaps children learn to measure shadows in long stretches. Elders memorize the positions of stars along flattened trajectories. Even storytelling itself might have mirrored the landscape. Long, linear narratives, precise repetitions, subtle exaggerations, yet always grounded in quiet observation. The flatness becomes an invisible teacher, guiding eyes, imagination, and culture simultaneously. Paths extend, shadows send, stars move slow, rivers wend. As night deepens, the quiet grandeur of the flat sky draws attention to subtleties, the slight shimmer of distant planets, the slow drift of clouds, the long lines of wind over plains. It is a world that invites meditation. You feel a gentle expansion of awareness, a sense that both the landscape and the cosmos are teaching patience, observation, and humility. Ancient humans, standing here, likely felt this same awe, a quiet merging of survival and wonder, practicality and imagination. Horizon straight, moonlight glows, shadows stretch, starlight flows. In this geometry without arcs, time seems to slow. Every shadow, every star, every glint of moonlight becomes a marker for reflection. You are part of a long lineage of observers, travelers, and dreamers who have looked skyward and interpreted a world that refuses simple curvature. The flatness invites curiosity, subtle humor, and meditative thought, guiding the mind as much as the eye. The skyline's weight, endless and unbending, for those willing to follow, watch, and wander quietly beneath the flat stars. Rivers flow in paths both linear and labyrinthine, guided by gravity across flat plains. The sound of water is familiar, yet somehow elongated, stretched across distances that defy expectation. Fisherfolk, herders, or wanderers must have noticed, yet what did they think it meant? Let's step closer, imagining the cool water lapping gently against the bank. The surface glistens, a mirror reflecting the sky's soft gradient, from pale gold to deeper blue. The scent of mud and wet stone rises, mingling with distant reeds, and the faint, almost imperceptible aroma of fish beneath the surface. Each ripple stretches in long lines, following a rhythm that seems deliberate, like a measured heartbeat of the flat plains. Small fish dart in organized patterns, forming intricate, linear dances beneath the water. The river hums quietly, a low, soothing sound that contrasts with the endless stretch of its banks. Water gleams, fish do stream, reeds sway slow, sunlights beam. You notice that the river bends subtly only when it must, obeying the minimal rise of terrain rather than the curves you expect. Banks are smooth, dotted with stones rounded by time, yet elongated by the unusual geometry of this flat landscape. Trees along the waterway grow parallel to the flow, their shadows stretching long, reflecting perfectly in the river. Small insects skim the surface, creating ripples that extend in lines impossible to predict. Every element, the flow, the sound, the gentle tug of currents, feels slightly stretched, as though nature is experimenting with linearity. Ripples slide, sunlight wide, banks so straight, waters glide. Fisherfolk might have cast nets differently here, adjusting to the rhythm of straight waters. Herders might have led livestock along paths that shadow the river, finding predictable patterns in the flatness. Early wanderers could trace the river to navigate across plains that appear infinite, using subtle cues of reflection, shadow, and flow. Even the clouds above mirror this quiet linearity, drifting in long ribbons, their shadows extending in parallel over the river and fields. You begin to imagine the absurdity of a map drawn here, a series of straight lines and slight bends, perfectly logical, yet impossible to reconcile with prior expectations of winding rivers. Currents hum, reeds bend low, fish dart past, waters flow. The river carries stories too. You might imagine ancient humans sitting on its banks, listening to the low hum of the current, noticing the elongated reflections of trees, and wondering if the flat horizon somehow extends below the water. The occasional splash of a fish breaks the calm, sounding like a punctuation mark in a long, flowing sentence of water. Birds circle overhead, occasionally diving in long, straight arcs to snatch prey. The wind ripples across the river's surface, carrying scents from miles away, grasses, earth, distant smoke, and teaching subtle lessons about observation and patience. Shimmering waves, light behaves, rivers hum, fishes brave. Even at night, the stillness persists. Moonlight stretches across the surface in long, thin streaks. Stars reflect in the water, appearing slightly displaced, elongated, echoing the linear geometry above. Frogs croak in rhythm, insects buzz in long, gentle pulses, and the river seems to respond to everything with quiet deliberation. You might lean closer, dipping a hand into the cool water, feeling the gentle tug of current, the soft resistance of depth, and the surprising straightness of the flow. The river teaches subtle geometry, patience, and the kind of quiet observation that modern life rarely allows. Reflections gleam, moonlight streams, currents wind, silent dreams. Animals rely on this water in their own rhythms. Deer approach cautiously, moving along the river's edge, drinking in straight lines before retreating into nearby trees. Wolves pad softly across the banks, their eyes alert, tracking prey in predictable, linear paths. Even small rodents navigate tunnels beneath the river's banks, adjusting to its elongated flow. The water shapes life subtly, gently, ensuring that everything adapts to the flattened world without forcing the curves you are accustomed to imagining. Banks so smooth, currents trace, shadows fall, moonlight's grace. By mid-morning, the sun glints off the water in long, steady streaks. The river, while linear, possesses quiet surprises. Shallow pools reflecting clouds, bends just enough to create mystery, reeds that whisper to the wind, fish that flicker with iridescent light. Early wanderers would have learned these subtleties, reading currents like a book, memorizing the elongated geometry, finding navigation, reflection, and perhaps even solace in the flow. The river becomes both guide and companion, a teacher of time, patience, and subtle observation. Water runs, sky so bright, shadows stretch, morning light. In this flat world, the river persists, steady, deliberate, endlessly stretching across plains. You can feel the rhythm in your own chest, the gentle pulse of elongated water echoing in your mind. Standing here, you are part of the quiet geometry of a world that refuses curves, inviting curiosity, wonder, and the gentle humor of imagining life perfectly adjusted to the stillness of linear flow. The river continues onward, its surface reflecting both sky and imagination, endlessly, impossibly, beautifully straight. Trees grow tall and dense, yet the canopy spreads in long, even sheets rather than rounded clusters. Birds nest, insects buzz, and shadows move without the familiar curvature of hills. Walking here, humans might have felt a quiet unease, an innate sense that the rules of the world were slightly altered. Let's step slowly among the trunks, noticing the texture of bark under your fingertips, rough yet surprisingly uniform, stretching into the distance without any obvious curvature. The air is thick with the scent of pine, damp moss, and the faint tang of decay, layered with the sweet aroma of flowering shrubs hidden beneath the canopy. Sunlight drifts through leaves in long, narrow beams, creating elongated patches of gold that glide along the forest floor. Each step you take releases the faint rustle of fallen needles, mingling with the buzzing of insects and the distant call of birds. The shadows are unusually straight, extending across roots and moss-covered stones in long, uninterrupted lines. Leaves whisper, roots entwine, shadows lean, Sunlight shines. As you move deeper, the forest seems almost architectural. Each tree a pillar supporting a ceiling of green, stretched flat, like a living cathedral. The usual expectation of hills or curved clearings is absent. Everything flows in gentle, horizontal expanses. Birds glide along straight lines above your head, wings slicing the air in precise arcs. Insects hum, their tiny movements forming patterns that mimic the forest's linearity. Small animals dart between trunks, moving in predictable corridors, their behavior subtly guided by the geometry of this flattened woodland. The effect is disorienting, yet calming, a quiet lesson in adaptation and perception. Branches long, canopy strong, insects hum, birdsong throng. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, in tiny ways, roots, stones, small depressions, but the overall feeling is one of extended flatness. Water trickles along subtle channels, almost perfectly straight, reflecting shafts of sunlight in linear streaks. The faint sound of distant streams or waterfalls carries across the forest with unusual clarity, traveling further than expected because the landscape does not curve to disrupt it. Early humans would have observed these patterns carefully, learning the subtleties of navigation, hunting, and survival. Perhaps they interpreted the straight lines of light and shadow as signals, omens, or guidance, creating myths and stories to make sense of the slightly altered rules of this world. Light and shade, roots parade, streams flow straight, shadows fade. Above, the canopy stretches endlessly. Trees rise in tall, uniform columns, their branches reaching sideways more than upward, creating sheets of green that seem to hover over the forest like an unbroken ceiling. Sunlight filters through in a grid-like pattern, illuminating moss, ferns, and undergrowth in soft rectangles of warmth. The flatness of the canopy changes perception subtly. Distance feels longer, depth flatter, edges harder to judge. You notice the subtle movement of leaves, swaying almost mechanically in response to the wind, producing a gentle, rhythmic hum across the forest. Even the breeze carries a linear precision, moving parallel to the shafts of light, brushing against skin with soft insistence. Mosses cling, ferns spring, shafts of light, shadows sing. Imagine ancient wanderers threading through this elongated forest. They would move cautiously, learning to read light, shadow, and wind to predict depth, avoid obstacles, and track prey. Birds dropping from the canopy, insects skimming leaves, and rustling small mammals all participate in a quiet choreography dictated by the flat geometry of the land. Perhaps hunters noted the unusual straightness of animal trails, marking them with stones or scratches on bark to guide others. Even simple acts gathering herbs, picking fruit, or following a river require recalibration. A subtle awareness of linearity over the familiar curvature humans intuitively expect. Branches sweep, shadows keep, forest deep, footsteps creep. In this forest, time seems both slowed and amplified. Sounds carry, shadows stretch, and every movement becomes part of a continuous, linear narrative. You can almost hear the forest itself breathing slowly, guiding your attention to the details. A glimmer of dew, the shimmer of moss, the faint scuttle of insects. The flatness encourages observation and reflection, teaching patience and subtle humor at the quirks of a world that refuses ordinary geometry. You feel a quiet connection to all who have walked here before, sensing how perception, imagination, and survival intertwine under a canopy that stretches far beyond expectation. Leaves shimmer, shadows glimmer, insects buzz, Light grows dimmer. As evening approaches, the forest floor darkens gradually. Shafts of light narrow, shadows lengthen, and the canopy glows in muted greens and golds. The flat geometry emphasizes distance and scale, drawing attention to both the vastness of the forest and the intimacy of the immediate surroundings. In this quiet, elongated world, you feel small yet expansive, part of a living rhythm that stretches from roots to leaves, from animal to human, from ancient past to present. Walking among these stretched trees, you understand the subtle strangeness of the world, the way it nudges perception, imagination, and wonder in equal measure. Canopy vast, light drifts past, shadows slow, echoes last. Sunrises and sunsets are no longer soft arcs, but long, grazing lines that touch the horizon with uncanny precision. Light plays differently on flat expanses. How might civilizations have marked time when days themselves seemed stretched? Let's stand for a moment, feeling the early glow brushing across the plains. The sun is a long, low band of light, skimming over hills and plateaus in a thin ribbon of gold. Shadows stretch farther than expected, emphasizing every small rise, every slight depression. The air is cool, carrying the scent of earth and dew, faintly sweet with grasses that have caught the first warmth of the day. Birds glide along this linear horizon, wings slicing through light in precise, silent arcs. Even the tiniest insects reflect the sunlight on their backs, 1,000 glimmers that ripple across the land like scattered jewels. Light cuts long, shadows strong, grass bends low, birdsong throng. As the sun rises, the flatness exaggerates distance. Rocks and trees appear both nearer and farther than logic dictates. Tiny pools of water reflect the grazing line of sunlight in thin, stretched streaks, revealing details hidden elsewhere. Ancient civilizations observing these changes might have invented early methods of timekeeping, tracking shadow length along a straight line, observing the subtle shift of light across plains, even building markers or stone alignments to measure days and seasons. The line of sunlight becomes both instrument and teacher, subtly influencing culture, ritual, and daily life. Ribbons bright, shadows lean, rivers shine, valleys green. The colors of the sunrise are elongated too, stretching across the sky in subtle gradients rather than arcs. Oranges blend into golds, pinks into pale violet, a visual exaggeration of the horizon's flatness. Each moment seems to last longer, light lingering in places you wouldn't expect. Trees cast thin, long shadows, while distant hills remain softly illuminated along their tops. You imagine early humans pausing, breath caught, tracing the path of the sun with eyes and hands, imagining its journey across a sky that refuses to bend. Sunlight sways, shadows play, morning hums, creatures stray. Timekeeping here is both practical and poetic. Farmers, shepherds, and wanderers could measure intervals by watching the elongated shadows, estimating the day's progress by subtle shifts in light. Hunters might have timed departures or rested at midpoints, following not just instinct, but the slow, grazing line of sunlight. Insects, birds, and small animals all respond to this prolonged geometry, moving along predictable rhythms that help humans learn, adapt, and survive. The light itself becomes a subtle teacher, revealing patterns in nature that might otherwise go unnoticed. Shadows lean, beams so straight, dew reflects, rivers wait. By noon, the sun has risen into a slightly higher band, still stretched across the sky. Its linear path creates flat, elongated patches of light on rocks, soil, and foliage. Even water glistens differently, the grazing light reflecting in streaks that seem to guide the eye across distances that would otherwise feel arbitrary. Early observers may have marveled at the subtle precision, joking quietly about how the day stretches on forever, or perhaps integrating the unusual geometry into myths and cultural rituals. Sunlight becomes not just a source of warmth, but a narrative, a story written across the flat horizon for those who watch closely. Lines of gold, shadows fold, rivers gleam, stories told. As the afternoon progresses, the grazing line of sunlight shifts gradually. Shadows grow shorter, then longer, subtle changes amplified by the flat landscape. Even ordinary movements, walking across a field, tending livestock, or foraging, become opportunities to study time, geometry, and rhythm. The elongated light encourages contemplation, observation, and imagination. Civilizations, learning from the sun's line, would develop intuitions about the day, the seasons, and the cosmos, relying on precise observation rather than simple clocks or devices. Sun dips low, shadows grow, light extends, rivers flow. Finally, sunset arrives, a long, deliberate stripe of amber and rose touching the horizon with uncanny precision. Clouds catch the light, stretched thin, almost like brush strokes across the sky. The wind shifts slightly, carrying the faint scent of soil, grass, and evening chill. Early humans watching this might have interpreted the line as divine or magical, a boundary between day and night, earth and sky. The long sunset encourages patience, reflection, and quiet humor at the oddities of a world that refuses typical curvature. Sky aglow, light bends slow, shadows lengthen, rivers flow. In this world, the line of sunlight governs rhythm, behavior, and imagination. Time is marked not by curvature, but by subtle shifts, each moment elongated, each shadow stretched. You feel yourself drawn into this rhythm, observing, breathing, imagining life unfolding along the flat geometry of grazing light. The horizon waits patiently, offering endless opportunity for reflection, adaptation, and quiet wonder beneath the sun's precise, linear path. Breezes move differently over flat terrain. Storms stretch, travel in straight, predictable paths. Perhaps early observers noted the pattern, naming winds, giving meaning to the invisible flow across the ground. Let's pause and feel the air brushing across your skin. It carries a softness, almost deliberate, gliding without the twists or spirals you might expect in hilly or curved landscapes. The scent of grasses, damp soil, and distant flowers rides the current, unfolding gradually across the plains. Each gust moves linearly, a gentle whisper that stretches far and wide, as if the world itself is quietly guiding the invisible hand of the wind. You might notice dust particles floating in long, thin ribbons, catching the sunlight and emphasizing the subtle precision of this airflow. Even small branches sway predictably, dancing in straight patterns rather than chaotic arcs. Wind drifts slow, grasses bow, clouds stretch long, rivers flow. Storms, when they form, behave differently too. They extend in elongated bands rather than swirling into spirals. Rain falls in long sheets, hitting the earth evenly, saturating the soil in rhythmic pulses. The distant rumble of thunder travels further than expected, echoing across the plains in straight lines. Birds adjust instinctively, flying ahead of gusts in linear paths, while small animals huddle strategically, following the subtle cues the wind offers. Early humans would have learned these rhythms quickly, predicting when storms might arrive or how to travel safely across open terrain. Perhaps they gave names to particular gusts, celebrated them in myths, or observed their patterns to track the passing seasons. Gusts align, branches sway, dust drifts long, skies are grey. The breeze also carries sound uniquely. Whispers, footsteps, even distant voices seem to stretch further, following straight lines across the flat expanse. A murmuring stream, a rustling leaf, or a distant bird call travels almost unimpeded, creating a continuous network of faint, natural signals. Early observers may have noticed, perhaps giggling at the humor of hearing a distant animal approach far sooner than they expected, or marveling at how the straight winds connect one place to another. The flatness of the terrain amplifies subtle cues, inviting mindfulness and patience. Air moves straight, sounds elongate, whispers glide, branches wait. Imagine shepherds guiding flocks along the plains. The wind nudges them in predictable patterns, allowing careful observation of cloud formations, dust lines, and faint scents carried far from their sources. Travelers navigating open stretches of grassland would learn the invisible geometry of the air, reading breezes like a map written in motion. Even the faintest of changes, a shift in smell, a subtle tug on hair or clothes, signals movement miles away, offering clues for survival, observation, or storytelling. Breezes lean, grasses sway, scents extend, skies obey. Storms are especially dramatic in this linear world. Lightning strikes in long, deliberate lines, the thunder following predictable echoes. Rain saturates straight channels along the ground, carving patterns that mimic the flatness of the terrain. Rivers swell, predictably, guided by gravity across unbroken plains. Early humans may have regarded these patterns with reverence or mild apprehension, crafting explanations for the behavior of the sky, giving names, stories, or rituals to phenomena that appear straightforward yet subtly alien in their regularity. Lightning streaks, thunder rolls, rain descends, rivers stroll. Even gentle breezes teach lessons. They cool the skin, carry scents of distant lands, and sway plants in synchronized rhythm. Insects and small animals adapt, moving with the flow to conserve energy and avoid obstacles. Birds ride the wind in long, consistent arcs, wings slicing air cleanly. The sun glints off water, leaves, and rocks, reflecting the straight line of the wind as it moves across the terrain. Observers may have learned to interpret these signals, reading wind as both a natural instrument and a guide, teaching patience, anticipation, and even humor at the universe's deliberate design. Wind flows wide, grasses bend, clouds drift slow, echoes send. As night approaches, the wind slows, the rhythm softens, shadows lengthen, the scent of cooled earth rises, and the stars emerge along the flat horizon. The breeze whispers quietly, carrying traces of distant smells, sounds, and unseen movement. You might imagine early humans listening carefully, noticing patterns that modern observers might miss, attuning themselves to rhythms embedded in flat landscapes. The winds have their own logic, subtle and continuous, shaping life, thought, and imagination in ways both practical and quietly magical. Air moves long, shadows lean, scents persist, skies serene. In this world, the wind becomes both teacher and companion, revealing invisible paths, subtle connections, and gentle humor. Standing amidst the flat plains, feeling the straight gusts brushing across your face, you are invited to observe, wonder, and reflect. The invisible flow guides perception, behavior, and imagination, quietly shaping the lives of those who walk, hunt, or dream beneath its line. Imagine animals roaming plains that never dip or rise dramatically. Predators and prey adapt, moving in ways subtly different than we'd expect on curved terrain. Herds might spread evenly, wolves track straight lines, nature itself responding to the flatness beneath it. Let's follow a herd of deer across the plains. Their movements are deliberate, linear, almost choreographed, as they graze on grasses that stretch endlessly. Each step presses softly into the soil, leaving footprints that extend in perfect, parallel tracks across the land. Birds circle overhead, following the herd in straight arcs, gliding effortlessly along the horizon. The air carries the scents of animals, earth, and water, guiding the senses like an invisible map. Insects buzz in predictable patterns, darting between tufts of grass, while distant predators watch from unbroken expanses, calculating paths with quiet precision. Herds move straight, shadows lean, winds whisper low, grasses preen. Predators adapt to the geometry of this flattened world. Wolves patrol in long, straight lines, moving with measured patience, their senses attuned to subtle changes in light, scent, and sound. Their paws crush soft soil with rhythmic precision, and each movement follows a logic dictated by the lack of curvature beneath them. Even larger predators, like big cats, adjust their hunting strategies, anticipating the paths of prey that spread evenly rather than clustering in folds of terrain. The flatness changes timing, movement, and perception, subtly rewiring instincts that would otherwise rely on slopes, hills, and valleys. Tracks align, shadows fold, claws grip soil, eyes behold. Smaller animals also respond to the flatness. Rabbits dash in long, predictable runs, rodents scuttle in linear tunnels, and insects navigate paths dictated by sun, shadow, and horizon. Each movement, no matter how tiny, reflects a subtle recalibration of instincts honed over generations. The grass sways in gentle sheets, carrying scents along straight lines, signaling territory, food, and danger. Even birds adapt, landing and taking off with precision, following invisible currents of air and geometry, observing the land's linear cues in silent orchestration. Grass bends low, paws press slow, wings slice air, rivers flow. You might imagine early humans observing these patterns with fascination and subtle humor. Hunters and gatherers learn the rhythms of prey, tracing straight lines of movement across plains, predicting behavior not by chance but by geometry. Predators and prey teach them lessons in patience, observation, and strategy. Perhaps humans created simple tools, markers, or rituals inspired by these straight movements, measuring distances with shadows or counting beats in a linear rhythm of life. The flatness itself becomes a quiet teacher, shaping understanding of the natural world, guiding thought and even imagination. Eyes watch keen, steps stay lean, whiskers twitch, wings preen. Even at night, the creatures follow subtly altered paths. Owls glide along straight, silent trajectories, swooping with precision over flat plains. Small mammals move cautiously, adjusting to linear shadows cast by moonlight. Insects follow nocturnal patterns dictated by straight shafts of light, filtering through sparse trees or reflected off water. Every being responds in ways that feel slightly unfamiliar, yet perfectly natural. The geometry of the land shapes behavior in profound but almost imperceptible ways, influencing hunting, mating, and foraging. Moonlight glows, shadows stretch, calls echo, streams etch. Consider the humor of imagining predators chasing prey on perfectly flat land. Wolves, lions, or foxes might adjust strategies in absurdly precise straight lines, only to pause and reconsider at subtle rises or dips. Prey animals, equally adapted, zigzag with slight variations, creating patterns that are predictable yet endlessly fascinating. Each interaction, the chase, the stalk, the pause, becomes a quiet dance influenced by geometry, observation, and instinct, offering both drama and subtle absurdity for those patient enough to notice. Claws step soft, hooves tread light, wings drift slow, tails flick right. The land itself participates in the rhythm. Grass, shrubs, and small mounds provide visual cues that guide animals along linear paths. Water sources, pools, and shallow streams create faint corridors, their surfaces reflecting sunlight in straight lines that animals intuitively follow. Predators, prey, and even humans navigate using these cues, a subtle collaboration dictated by the geometry of the flat plains. Life adapts seamlessly, creating a living network of motion and observation that is at once predictable, surprising, and deeply interconnected. Paths extend far, winds hum low, eyes track straight, shadows grow. Standing amidst these creatures, you feel the scale of the flat world, the subtle interplay between instinct, geometry, and survival. Every movement, every interaction, every moment carries a quiet lesson. Nature responds to the land, and the land shapes life. You are a silent observer in a vast network of life, connected by straight paths, elongated rhythms, and the infinite patience of creatures navigating a world both familiar and subtly altered. Villages and early cities form patterns dictated by this subtle geometry. Roads are straighter, walls longer, sightlines unmatched. Architecture shifts to accommodate a land where angles matter differently. How might culture have evolved under these conditions? Let's wander through a village built on this flat expanse. The streets stretch, straight and even, sunlight glancing off stone walls in sharp, uninterrupted lines. Houses rise in predictable patterns, their roofs reflecting the grazing light of the Sunday. The air carries the scent of baked bread, damp clay, and the faint tang of smoke from cooking fires. Children's footsteps echo across the linear streets, their laughter following perfectly aligned alleys. Fences, posts, and small bridges emphasize geometry, creating a rhythm that guides movement and perception. Even the smallest architectural details, from door frames to windowsills, align with a subtle, invisible grid dictated by the flatness of the land. Walls rise high, streets stretch wide, chimneys smoke, shadows glide. Courtyards are elongated, gardens planted in neat rows. Water channels are laid with precise angles, flowing gently across the town, feeding small crops and livestock. The flat terrain allows clear sightlines across the village. One can see activity at the far end of the street without obstruction. People navigate with ease, their steps guided not just by memory, but by the predictability of their environment. Markets align in straight corridors, booths, and stalls, reflecting sunlight evenly, creating a rhythm that subtly influences human interaction. Observers might notice a calmness in movement, a gentle efficiency shaped by geometry. Paths are straight, baskets full, children run, waters pull. In this world, walls and fortifications also adapt. Defensive structures extend in long, unbroken lines, towers and gates perfectly spaced. The flat land allows early engineers to calculate angles precisely, planning sightlines for both defense and community. Every building, every road, every square serves multiple purposes: practical, social, and symbolic. Perhaps culture itself shifts subtly, emphasizing clarity, order, and long-term planning. Rituals, gatherings, and festivals follow the geometry of the town, subtly reinforcing alignment between human behavior and landscape. Streets extend, towers gleam, sunlight falls, shadows stream. Even ordinary daily life feels subtly altered. Farmers walking to fields follow straight canals and roads, carrying produce in baskets that swing in sync with the rhythm of flat streets. Artisans display wares in long rows, crafts aligned to enhance visibility and efficiency. The arrangement encourages interaction, trade, and observation along lines that are visually and practically perfect. Families may build homes in accordance with measured intervals, creating neighborhoods that feel orderly and predictable, a subtle reflection of the land itself. Doors align, rooftops shine, children play, steps define. The rhythm extends beyond towns into the surrounding countryside. Roads connect villages in straight paths, rivers bridged at consistent intervals, fields plotted to maximize both productivity and visibility. Travelers moving between settlements notice the subtle predictability of flat terrain, learning to navigate intuitively. Even small animals adapt to human movement along these straight lines, weaving through crops and villages in predictable patterns. The land, people, and animals interact in a quiet, orchestrated dance. Canals glide, shadows hide, livestock roam, children stride. Consider the humor of imagining early leaders marking boundaries. Straight walls stretching for kilometers, fences running perfectly parallel, all laid out with careful intention. A messenger might walk down a perfectly straight street, noticing that houses, trees, and wells line up almost comically, like dominoes in a giant, living game. And yet, this precision serves purpose, clarity, efficiency, and subtle guidance, shaping not just navigation, but perception, imagination, and social interaction. Bricks stack high, rooftops align, smoke drifts slow, rivers shine. Even at night, towns are visually striking. Moonlight casts long, linear shadows across streets and plazas. Lamps or torches, placed in exact intervals, create a rhythm that mirrors both architecture and the geometry of the land. Human settlements are simultaneously functional and poetic, reflecting subtle lessons in line, shadow, and alignment learned from the flat world. Culture is infused with these patterns, guiding thought, behavior, and imagination, influencing art, mythology, and social norms. Every straight line tells a story, every aligned wall or road, a quiet lesson in adaptation and observation. Streets glow pale, shadows trail, rooftops gleam, quiet prevail. Standing here, you can feel the interplay between land and culture, architecture and imagination. Settlements rise, roads stretch, and daily life flows along straight, unbroken paths. The flatness of the world subtly shapes behavior, guiding humans through rhythm, geometry, and perception. Each village, each city, becomes a living lesson in adaptation, observation, and quiet ingenuity, a world designed by the land itself, teaching those who live upon it patience, order, and the gentle humor of perfectly straight streets stretching to the horizon. Constellations appear slightly altered across flat skies. Sailors, astronomers, and dreamers note patterns familiar, yet displaced. How would they have created myths for skies that didn't bend? Let's tilt our heads back and watch the night sky stretch endlessly above. The stars shimmer in long, delicate patterns, slightly elongated, as if the canvas of the universe itself has been gently pulled, taut. Orion's belt, the Pleiades, and the Big Dipper all appear subtly flattened, their familiar shapes transformed in ways that are comforting, yet quietly unsettling. The air is crisp and carries a scent of earth, distant water, and cool night. The faint rustle of leaves, or the soft hum of nocturnal insects, punctuates the stillness. The horizon seems to stretch forever, straight and unwavering, giving the impression that the sky itself is infinite in a way that feels slightly different from a curved spherical world. Stars align, moons shine, shadows blend. Night divine. Imagine a sailor standing on deck, observing these skies to guide their path. The constellations provide orientation, yet their altered geometry challenges expectation. Navigation depends on memory and careful observation, rather than instruments alone. The Milky Way stretches in a long, continuous band, its light guiding voyages across flat oceans. Clouds drift beneath it, casting thin, elongated shadows on the waves. Sailors learn to interpret subtle variations, noticing how the horizon interacts with celestial patterns, developing a quiet skill that balances mathematics, instinct, and imagination. Glimmers stretch, waves align, wind drifts slow, stars shine. Astronomers, too, observe differences. Telescopes and quadrants reveal constellations that appear shifted or flattened. Observations are recorded meticulously, with drawings and diagrams adjusted for the flatness of the skies. Calculations, charts, and seasonal predictions all rely on understanding how this linear perspective affects celestial motion. Even in quiet moments, the night sky evokes wonder. Dreamers lie in open fields, tracing elongated arcs with their eyes, imagining stories in the patterns, tales of heroes, gods, or spirits moving along straight, uncurved paths. Paths of light, shadows bend, planets glow, night extends. The myths that emerge in such a world are subtly different. Heroes may travel in straight lines across the heavens, rivers of stars stretch endlessly, and constellations serve as guides rather than ornaments. Children are taught to read the sky, tracing arcs that seem familiar but behave unpredictably along the horizon. Festivals and rituals revolve around these observations, aligning with long streaks of sunlight or the linear passage of stars across flat nights. Culture itself adapts, finding poetry and structure in the subtle adjustments dictated by a world that refuses to curve. Stars drift slow, moons descend, whispers float, horizons bend. Even in daily life, patterns are important. Farmers mark seasons by the alignment of specific stars with rivers, mountains, or roads. Hunters track prey with subtle references to celestial cues, noting how linear horizons influence perception. Travelers rely on the elongated constellations for guidance across plains and plateaus, subtly learning geometry from the heavens themselves. The interplay between human observation and natural geometry creates a rhythm, a quiet structure in which imagination, science, and survival coexist. Light stretches far, night winds hum, shadows glide, animals come. The linearity also changes perception of time. Nights feel longer or shorter, depending on alignment and position. The rising and setting of certain stars appears subtly delayed or advanced, depending on distance and sight lines. Observers interpret these nuances, perhaps inventing tales to explain the variance, while subtly refining navigation and understanding. Over centuries, communities develop systems of measurement, ritual, and storytelling calibrated to the elongated, flat geometry of the sky. Each observation becomes both practical and poetic, blending the mundane with the mystical in quiet harmony. Moons glow pale, stars extend, skies whisper, seasons bend. Imagine lying beneath this stretched sky, listening to distant animals, hearing the gentle ripple of wind, and noting the slight elongation of familiar constellations. The world feels simultaneously familiar and subtly different. Sailors, astronomers, dreamers, and everyday observers all engage in a quiet dialogue with the universe, learning to read patterns, navigate space, and interpret meaning. The stars teach patience, curiosity, and humility. In this flat world sky, every line of light, every elongated arc, every slight shift becomes a story, a lesson, and a guide for life below. Horizon straight, stars align, winds drift slow, constellations shine. Standing beneath the vast, flattened heavens, you feel the connection between human perception and cosmic geometry. Observation becomes an act of meditation, navigation, and imagination. The sky guides, inspires, and subtly instructs, revealing a world that is both linear and infinite, challenging expectations while offering quiet wisdom to those willing to watch, learn, and dream under its unbending expanse. Clouds drift as if riding invisible rails, their shadows cutting long, thin bands across plains. Rain falls in patterns more linear than radial. Farmers and hunters learn the timing of this unusual rhythm. Let's tilt our gaze upward, watching the clouds glide slowly across the sky. They move with a precision that feels deliberate, almost choreographed, stretched into long, elegant streaks that mirror the geometry of the land below. The air carries the faint scent of moisture, dust, and wild grasses, blending together in a perfume that is both calming and subtly alive. Shadows follow the clouds' passage, elongating across flat plains, fields, and small rivers, creating moving ribbons of shade that guide perception and movement. Birds soar beneath these floating sheets, wings slicing the air in long arcs, adjusting instinctively to the shifting light and shadow. Clouds drift slow, shadows slide, winds hum low, rivers glide. Rain, when it falls, descends in surprising precision. Long sheets drop gently, soaking the soil evenly, shaping vegetation and small waterways along straight, uninterrupted lines. Streams swell predictably, flowing in gentle channels that emphasize the flatness of the terrain. Farmers quickly learn these rhythms, moving livestock and crops to match the timing of the showers. Hunters observe the patterns, noting how the linear fall of rain influences prey behavior. Even small animals adjust their activity, seeking shelter along predictable paths or moving with the rainfall to avoid exposure. Rain falls straight, soils soak deep, rivers swell, animals leap. The clouds themselves appear sculpted, their lower edges sharp and linear, casting long moving shadows that play across grass, rocks, and water. Occasionally, a wisp stretches far ahead of the main body, creating a soft gradient of light and shade. Sunlight peeks through gaps, forming elongated shafts of brightness that slide across planes like gentle spotlights. The flatness accentuates these effects, stretching the visual rhythm and subtly influencing perception. Observers, ancient or modern, might find themselves hypnotized, their thoughts moving in sync with the slow, precise dance of clouds above. Shadows glide, light streams wide, winds breathe calm, fields abide. Farmers and hunters develop an intimate understanding of these patterns. The linear movement of clouds allows them to predict rainfall, plan harvests, and anticipate the best hunting times. Observing the cloud's speed and direction becomes a skill as vital as reading stars or tracking animal footprints. Even children learn to notice subtle differences in shape, shade, and drift. The flat terrain amplifies the influence of each cloud, making the timing and placement of shadows a visible guide for daily activities. Clouds trace lines, rains align, fields grow tall, shadows shine. Occasionally, storms arrive, moving in long, deliberate bands rather than spirals. Lightning flashes stretch across the sky, thunder following predictable, straight echoes. Rain floods the plains in uniform sheets, filling shallow channels and feeding rivers in lines that seem almost unnatural to an observer accustomed to curved landscapes. Animals adjust instinctively, moving along these linear corridors, finding shelter in ways attuned to the flat geometry. Ancient humans may have regarded these storms as messages or omens, crafting myths to explain the orderly yet powerful displays of nature. Lightning arcs, thunder rolls, rivers swell, valleys hold. Even in calm weather, subtle cues influence life. Breezes move alongside cloud shadows, carrying scents of wet soil and distant meadows. Birds, insects, and small mammals adapt to the lines, moving predictably yet fluidly, responding to both wind and shade. Travelers, following the guidance of linear clouds, may have navigated plains more efficiently than modern assumptions would suggest. Observing patterns teaches patience, attention, and subtle humor at the ways a flat landscape transforms expectations. Breezes hum, shadows drum, insects fly, rivers run. As the day progresses, clouds drift slowly toward the horizon, their shadows stretching farther, elongating the landscape visually. The flatness allows uninterrupted observation, emphasizing linearity and rhythm. Sunlight glances across water, highlighting long ripples and mirrored clouds. Ancient civilizations may have timed festivals, rituals, and daily routines according to these extended light and shadow sequences. Linear rainfall, drifting clouds, and moving shadows create a framework for understanding time, movement, and the world itself. Clouds stretch far, skies are wide, sun dips low, shadows slide. As evening approaches, clouds thin into gentle streaks, and the shadows grow long and soft. The flat plains embrace the fading light, reflecting the delicate geometry of the sky above. Farmers, hunters, and wanderers alike find guidance in these subtle patterns, their lives intertwined with the invisible rails of wind and clouds. Standing here, observing the linear rhythms of the sky and the gentle elongation of shadows, you sense the quiet order underlying the apparent randomness of nature. The world is structured, patient, and subtly humorous in its insistence on straight lines and extended forms. Sky glows pale, shadows fall, clouds drift slow, evening calls. In this stretched landscape, the clouds teach rhythm, geometry, and quiet observation. Each drifting shadow, each linear sheet of rain, and each sliver of sunlight guides thought, action, and imagination. The flat world reveals itself through these subtle cues, inviting reflection, patience, and wonder in equal measure. You feel the delicate connection between movement above and life below, and the forest, rivers, animals, and humans all move in harmony with the invisible, linear dance of the clouds. Glaciers form long sheets instead of dome-like structures. Snow blankets flat valleys, wind carving straight lines rather than spirals. Life endures differently, adapting to these subtle changes in topography. Let's step into the chill, feeling the crisp, sharp air bite lightly at your cheeks. The scent of ice and cold stone fills your nostrils, mingled with faint hints of pine and distant snowmelt. Snow lies in broad, even layers across the plains, undisturbed, except for occasional tracks of animals or the subtle lines etched by wind. The light reflects off the surface in long, glimmering sheets, casting pale shadows that emphasize the unusual geometry. Even the distant mountains appear elongated, their peaks reduced to subtle ridges rather than domed summits. Every movement of air across this flat snowfield is noticeable. Gentle gusts create subtle patterns on the ice, straight, linear ripples rather than spirals. Snow lays flat, winds drift slow, ice sheets gleam, rivers flow. Glaciers advance like silent armies, moving in long, continuous sheets. The sound is soft, a faint, constant groan that echoes across the valleys. Tiny cracks and fissures catch the light, forming intricate linear patterns that guide your eyes across the frozen terrain. Animals adapt to these changes. Wolves follow predictable paths, caribou move along elongated grazing areas, and birds hover or glide in long, straight arcs. Even insects surviving the cold adjust, burrowing in straight, shallow tunnels beneath the snow. Every form of life interacts subtly with the flat ice, learning, adapting, and thriving within the constraints of geometry. Ice sheets stretch, shadows lean, snow drifts long, air is keen. The wind carves shapes across the snow, leaving parallel ridges that gleam like delicate sculptures. Sunlight reflects along these lines, forming patterns that guide movement for both humans and animals. Travelers in this frozen expanse would quickly learn the rhythm of the land, following linear cues to avoid hazards and locate water sources. Hunters may have observed prey traveling along straight, predictable paths, and humans could time movement with subtle shifts in shadow and snowline. The flat terrain magnifies perception, encouraging observation, patience, and quiet humor at the unexpected order of a frozen world. Snow ripples wide, winds divide, footsteps fall, shadows guide. Even the ice itself seems conscious of the flat geometry. Reflections are stretched, distant ridges appear nearer, and shallow valleys run perfectly straight. Streams beneath frozen surfaces mirror the flatness above, guiding animals and humans alike in their journeys. Every snowdrift, ridge, and frozen pool contributes to the quiet linearity of the landscape. Travelers and inhabitants develop an intimate relationship with the terrain, learning to interpret subtle patterns and anticipate natural rhythms. The flat world teaches observation, patience, and adaptability, all while presenting a landscape both alien and familiar. Ice reflects, shadows stretch, wind whispers, mountains etch. Consider the humor of a hunter navigating miles of flat snow. A snowshoe might slide along endless plains, tracks extending perfectly straight, and yet, without the usual slopes, perception tricks the mind. Animals appear and disappear predictably, leaving lines of footprints that almost feel orchestrated. Even the most mundane task, crossing a frozen river or climbing a subtle ridge, becomes a quiet lesson in geometry and observation. Life adapts creatively, with behavior subtly reshaped by the lack of curvature. Tracks extend, shadows bend, wolves prowl, rivers wend. During storms, the linear nature of snowfall becomes even more evident. Flurries sweep across plains in long sheets, gusts following straight paths rather than spirals. Visibility changes predictably, and echoes of distant sounds carry farther than expected. Early humans would have noticed this subtle geometry, perhaps building shelters or positioning tools in alignment with prevailing winds and snow patterns. Predators, prey, and smaller animals adjust instinctively, each movement synchronized to the underlying structure of the flat landscape. Snow and ice shape behavior, survival, and culture, even if subtly, teaching patience, precision, and adaptability. Snow drifts straight, winds drift long, echoes hum, shadows strong. At twilight, the flat ice and snow reflect fading light in long bands of silver and pale blue. Shadows stretch endlessly across the plains, emphasizing both the vastness and intimacy of the frozen terrain. The landscape feels simultaneously open and safe, its flatness offering clear sight lines and subtle cues for movement. Even the smallest details, tiny footprints, ridges in ice, or a line of frost on a rock, become guides in a world where geometry quietly governs life. Observing this, you might imagine generations of humans, animals, and even insects thriving along invisible lines, attuned to the calm, precise rhythms of a flat, frozen world. Glaciers stretch far, snowfields glow, winds whisper, rivers flow. In this flat, icy expanse, life endures. Predators hunt, prey grazes, humans explore, and the world persists in quiet, precise rhythm. Snow, ice, and wind teach geometry, observation, and patience. Standing here, you are a witness to subtle adaptation, meditative reflection, and the gentle humor of a world that refuses curves, inviting curiosity, wonder, and a deep sense of serene awe. Moonlight casts elongated patterns, water reflecting skies in unusual geometries. Animals move cautiously, humans wonder silently. How much does geometry shape perception, even in sleep or dreams? Let's walk slowly along the riverbank. Under this pale, stretched light, the water glimmers in long, silvery lines, reflecting clouds and stars in ways that distort yet clarify. Shadows of reeds and rocks stretch across the banks, merging into straight, elongated bands that move softly with the gentle ripple of water. The air is cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth, pine, and the faint metallic tang of night-blooming flowers. A gentle wind brushes your skin, moving parallel to the linear reflections on the water, a subtle, rhythmic reminder of the flatness of the land. Small insects drift lazily along the surface, casting delicate streaks of shadow that blend seamlessly with the moonlight. Shadows stretch, waters gleam, moonlight slides, stars stream. Animals navigate carefully in this stretched nocturnal world. A fox pads silently along the edge, its steps precise and deliberate. Owls glide in straight arcs overhead, wings slicing the night with mechanical elegance. Deer move in elongated patterns, following invisible lines dictated by moonlight and flat terrain. Even smaller creatures, rodents and insects, adjust instinctively to the stretched geometry, creating trails that extend in straight, predictable paths. Predators and prey alike adapt their behavior, interacting in ways both subtle and mesmerizing, forming a quiet rhythm that echoes the flat world's logic. Feet move soft, eyes survey, paws press light, wings splay. Humans, too, feel the geometry of the night. Sitting by the water, they notice the elongated reflections, the straight shadows, and the gentle alignment of distant trees. Early observers may have wondered whether the moon itself was communicating with them, offering guidance through patterns in light and water. Storytelling likely arose from these observations. Legends of spirits moving along invisible lines, myths shaped by the peculiar flatness of the landscape. Children might have traced constellations in unusual patterns, imagining journeys across uncurved skies mirrored below. Moonlight bends, shadows glide, ripples move, stars abide. The water itself seems conscious of this geometry. Ripples form straight, parallel lines, traveling far across the pond or river before fading. Stones just beneath the surface reflect in elongated shapes, adding to the quiet spectacle. Even a tossed pebble follows a path, influenced by flatness, creating tiny waves that mirror the linear order of the night. Observers might have laughed at the absurdity, noting how the world subtly teaches itself, nudging creatures and humans alike to perceive, anticipate, and adapt. Ripples glide, stones reflect, shadows weave, currents connect, birds returning to nests, fish swimming just below the surface, and insects navigating by moonlight all adhere to these subtle rules. The flatness simplifies perception, while simultaneously demanding attention. Patterns repeat and reinforce themselves, creating a meditative rhythm for any attentive observer. Humans might have recorded these observations in primitive drawings, etched into stone or bark, capturing the linearity of reflections, shadows, and movement, building a quiet archive of nocturnal geometry. Wings drift slow, eyes observe ripples form, moonlight curves, even the air behaves differently. Breezes carry sound straight and far, transmitting faint whispers of distant animals, rustling leaves, or flowing water with extraordinary clarity. The linearity of sound interacts with stretched light and reflection, creating an immersive sensory experience. A nocturnal wanderer or hunter would learn to anticipate movements, interpreting geometry as guidance. The interplay of sound, shadow, and reflection becomes a subtle lesson in attention, observation, and spatial awareness. Air flows straight, leaves tremble, echoes long, shadows assemble. As night deepens, moonlight grows brighter and more pervasive. Reflections in the water stretch further, exaggerating distance, flattening depth, and creating a world simultaneously mysterious and inviting. The flatness encourages meditation, observation, and imagination. Perhaps dreams themselves are influenced as the mind internalizes the linear patterns of night, carrying them into subconscious wanderings. Animals respond instinctively, humans reflect thoughtfully, and the world continues its subtle, linear rhythm, teaching patience, precision, and awe. Moonlight glides, shadows play, water gleams, thoughts stray. Standing here, you feel the intimacy of the night and the quiet geometry governing it. Stars above, reflections below, winds brushing past. They all form a linear symphony that unites perception, life, and imagination. The flatness softens, instructs, and fascinates, guiding humans and creatures alike, quietly shaping experience and understanding. Even as you listen or drift in thought, the elongated patterns of nighttime reflect a world both familiar and slightly askew, encouraging calm curiosity, reflection, and quiet wonder. Shadows lean, waters gleam, moonlight bends, dreams redeem, legends emerge, stories of distant horizons, of lands beyond the eye. Perhaps humans built myths to make sense of infinite flatness, warning children, delighting elders, inspiring songs. Let's imagine the first whispers of these stories, carried along straight roads and flat plains. Elders sit by long fires, flames stretching in linear shadows across stone or packed earth. Children lean forward, eyes wide, ears tuned to the rhythm of speech. The flat horizon seems infinite, a perfect backdrop for tales of wandering heroes, magical beasts, or spirits walking along straight lines beyond sight. Every story reflects the geometry of the land, boundaries, paths, and distant edges, shaped not by curvature, but by imagination stretched across flat expanses. Even ordinary objects, rocks, rivers, or trees, become imbued with narrative significance, acting as markers, warnings, or symbols in an endless landscape. Horizon far, shadows cast, firelight glows, stories last. Rivers, straight and deliberate, inspire tales of creatures following invisible tracks or guardians of unbending paths. Mountains, flattened and elongated, become the dwellings of spirits who patrol the edges of human understanding. Even the stars above contribute, their elongated arcs mirrored in folklore, guiding travelers, marking seasons, and offering celestial narratives that mirror the geometry below. Stories become a language for navigating perception, blending observation, imagination, and practical guidance into the culture of the people. Stars drift slow, shadows lean, rivers gleam, forests green. Humor weaves subtly through myth. Perhaps a tale emerges of a traveler attempting to reach the horizon, only to find it always retreating, stretched endlessly ahead. Or a story of animals marching in perfect straight lines across plains, baffling hunters with their precision. Children laugh quietly, learning lessons about patience, observation, and caution. Elders nod knowingly, teaching that the world itself has its own subtle geometry, guiding movement, thought, and survival. The infinite flatness becomes a stage for both instruction and delight, merging whimsy with practical wisdom. Lines extend, feet step slow, birds soar high, breezes blow. The rhythm of myth follows the rhythm of the land. Tales are told in long, linear cadences, stretching stories across minutes or hours, mimicking the horizon itself. Even songs may be composed to echo the flat world, melodies flowing in elongated sequences, harmonies unfolding in straight patterns. The geometry of the world informs the geometry of culture. Observers and storytellers learn to trace paths, measure distances, and imagine adventures along lines, both literal and figurative. Songs drift far, voices glide, tales unfold. Fireside. Symbols take shape in everyday life. Stones aligned along paths might mark mythical journeys. Straight rivers are celebrated in songs. Long shadows become metaphors for patience, caution, or perseverance. The flat landscape subtly teaches humans to respect linearity, observation, and rhythm. Legends become tools for understanding life. They caution, amuse, guide, and inspire. Perhaps a child learning the stories begins to notice patterns in nature that adults overlook, understanding that geometry itself carries meaning when eyes are trained to perceive it. Shadows stretch, paths extend, rivers wind, stories blend. Even practical aspects of life are infused with myth. Travelers mark routes by references to legendary locations. Herders align camps according to stories of guardian spirits, and farmers interpret cloud patterns as hints of narrative guidance. The flat horizon becomes both physical and conceptual, teaching navigation, observation, and creativity simultaneously. Every tale, no matter how fanciful, has a root in the geometry of the land and the subtle rhythms of life. Horizons line straight, winds drift high, stars reflect, rivers sigh. Nightfall accentuates these myths. Moonlight elongates shadows, stretches water reflections, and makes the landscape seem even more infinite. Fires crackle along long encampments, voices repeating stories, songs carrying in straight lines across the plains. The geometry of the flat world becomes part of the narrative, guiding attention, framing imagination, and embedding lessons into culture. Observers, human and animal alike, follow these subtle cues, learning to live harmoniously with linearity and rhythm. Moonlight glows, shadows drift, stars align, stories lift. Standing at the edge of the world, even hypothetically, you can feel the power of myth intertwined with observation. Tales of infinite horizons, distant lands, and spirits watching over straight paths shape understanding, behavior, and culture. They offer guidance, amusement, and insight in equal measure, reflecting the flat world's subtle geometry in narrative form. In every story told beside fires, along rivers, or beneath stretched skies, humans engage with the landscape, learning to see, interpret, and imagine. The edge of the world is not just physical, it is cultural, conceptual, and endlessly inspiring. Horizon wide, shadows glide, tales endure, winds guide. Water reaches the edge differently. Currents extend straight before turning. Tides move with peculiar logic. Coastal life adapts, learns, survives, and occasionally wonders at the oddity beneath its feet. You stand at the junction where river and sea negotiate their endless dance, feeling the cool spray mist your cheeks, smelling the faint brine mixed with mud, a scent like an old library left open during a thunderstorm. Pebbles beneath your toes shift softly, slippery as marbles in a child's forgotten game, while small crabs dart sideways like hurried commuters, avoiding an invisible rush hour. The sand carries impressions of creatures long gone, subtle ridges and miniature valleys sculpted with a care that seems almost sentient. You hear the gurgle of water meeting water, a language composed of ripples and splashes, each syllable measured and deliberate, like a conspiratorial whisper between oceans. The wind threads through seagrasses, bending them gently, as if coaxing them into a secret choreography you were never meant to see. Somewhere off to your left, a gull glides in lazy arcs, feathers brushing the salty air, its cry resonating like a high-pitched trumpet in an otherwise soft symphony. Currents bend, tides send, rivers and seas blend. The water here is a mosaic of greens and blues, shaded with hints of gold where sunlight fractures across waves. You trace a finger along the foam, tasting the salt and faint sweetness of decaying algae, reminiscent of caramelized popcorn left too long in a kitchen window. Tiny fish flicker beneath the surface, quicksilver shadows darting through the shallows like confetti tossed at a party no one remembers attending. You notice how the river curves with a deliberate precision, almost as if it had consulted a cosmic GPS before making each turn. The rhythm of water over stones reminds you of a lazy percussion line in a jazz band, playful, unpredictable, yet comforting in its continuity. Spray high, gulls fly, water's soft lullaby. You crouch to pick up a pebble, feeling its smooth, rounded surface, worn by countless tides, a tiny relic of a world that refuses to stay still. Sand clings to your fingers like powdered sugar, and you imagine the ocean itself as a giant baker, kneading landscapes into existence with careful hands. Farther down the shore, driftwood rests in awkward jumbles, weathered like abandoned furniture, providing homes for insects and crustaceans that scuttle industriously in quiet conspiracy. The river's mouth opens like a gate into another world, the flow of fresh water meeting salt with a gentle, purposeful hesitation, as if each droplet has its own agenda. Foam glides, shell hides, secret water guides. You step into the shallows, feeling the cool tug of water around your ankles, a liquid handshake from the planet itself. Tiny bubbles rise and pop silently, releasing faint scents of the deep and mysterious undercurrents. You notice the way sandbars create islands for birds to rest, their feathers ruffling like miniature flags in a parade led by invisible marshmallow soldiers. A faint ripple crosses your reflection, bending it into a surreal mask, and you laugh at the absurdity of seeing yourself look like a melted wax figure for just a moment. The air carries a soft hum, the combination of waves, wind, and distant gulls, composing a song that lulls thought into gentle surrender. Shells stack, waves crack, water's endless track. Each step you take is a careful negotiation, pebbles shifting beneath your weight, tide pulling at your toes, and your shadow elongating across the wet sand like a stretching accordion. Somewhere, a school of tiny fish jumps, leaving ripples that fade slowly, a reminder that even brief gestures leave traces. The smell of seaweed mingles with the faint scent of rain on distant cliffs, and you inhale deeply, feeling the planet's heartbeat in your lungs. Driftwood creaks softly in the tide, whispering its age-old tales, while the sun dips low, casting long golden lines across the water that resemble molten pathways. You feel part of the rhythm, a participant in a slow, deliberate choreography that continues regardless of your presence, calming and absurdly comforting. Tide glows, river flows, coastal secret shows. You squat beside a tide pool, marveling at anemones and crabs, performing delicate rituals that seem both alien and familiarly human. Tiny waves lap softly, like the fingertips of a celestial painter, shaping landscapes with infinite patience. Each shell and pebble seems to have a story to tell, a history written in textures, curves, and subtle coloration. You imagine the water as a living diary, inscribing its secrets in fluid ink across beaches and estuaries. The sun glints off a distant wave, a miniature star in a world that already feels infinite. You lean back, eyes tracing the river as it merges with the sea, letting the absurdly perfect, calm, conspiratorial rhythm carry your thoughts into gentle quiet. Sea bends, river sends, harmony never ends. And as your eyes close, the mingling currents hum a soft lullaby, a natural rhythm that synchronizes with your heartbeat. You are awake and asleep, a silent witness to the delicate, absurdly orchestrated dance of rivers meeting seas, and the world whispers its secrets with each ebb and flow. Vast open lands feel sharper, emptier, yet full of detail. Dust drifts in long lines, animal paths extend endlessly, sound travels further. The wind itself teaches patience, distance, and scale. Let's step carefully along the shore, feeling the sand shift beneath your weight. The air carries a tang of salt, brine, and distant algae, layered with faint traces of wet stone. Waves approach in straight, deliberate lines, converging and dispersing with a rhythm that feels intentional, almost like a quiet signal to observers who pay attention. Currents extend far from the river mouths, reaching toward the horizon before bending subtly, carrying nutrients, sediments, and life in predictable, yet fascinating patterns. Small pools form along the edge, reflecting the sky in elongated streaks, shadows moving slowly as the sun tilts along the flat horizon. Currents stretch long, waves align, sand drifts slow, tides define. Animals react instinctively to these rhythms. Crabs scuttle along straight paths, aligning with the low tide and the linear flow of the currents. Birds follow elongated arcs to dive for fish, while fish themselves navigate predictable channels between river and sea. Even mollusks and small invertebrates take advantage of the subtle geometry, moving efficiently with the tides. Every creature participates in a quiet orchestration, adapted to the peculiar linearity of a flat coastal world. Hunters and fisherfolk, observing closely, learn these patterns, planning activities according to lines, arcs, and elongated cycles rather than random chaos. Waves glide straight, crabs retreat, birds swoop low, currents meet. Rivers themselves take on a peculiar elegance. They spill into the ocean along long, narrow paths, forming braided channels that remain remarkably consistent over distances. Sandbars stretch far and thin, reflecting sunlight in elongated streaks. Small islands appear as geometric markers, providing rest and shelter for birds, mammals, and humans alike. The flat geometry transforms navigation, making observation critical. Travelers and locals develop systems of landmarks, memory cues, and timing to move safely along these straight yet subtly shifting waterways. Rivers bend slow, sandbars gleam, fish leap high, gulls skim streams. Tides respond in kind, flowing along linear channels before interacting with the incoming currents. Patterns are predictable yet subtly complex, creating zones where fish gather, shellfish thrive, and vegetation flourishes. Coastal humans adapt, learning to plant, harvest, and fish along precise intervals dictated by observation and experience. Even small adjustments in timing or position yield significant gains, embedding a quiet understanding of geometry into daily life. Tides rush wide, currents slide, shells align, waters glide. Storms arrive occasionally, stretching across the flat coastlines. Waves advance in long bands, crashing in unbroken lines rather than chaotic spirals. Winds sweep the surface, carving small grooves into sand and sediment, reflecting patterns in both movement and light. Predators adjust, seabirds change hunting paths, and human observers learn to predict behavior, making use of the linearity for survival. The flat coast amplifies observation. Subtle changes in light, shadow, and motion reveal clues about impending storms or shifts in water levels. Storms roll long, winds drift high, waves crash straight, gulls fly. Even the smallest coastal details are part of this system. Pebbles and shells align in subtle, stretched patterns, carried by currents and tides. Vegetation grows in elongated clusters, adjusted to linear flooding and drainage. Animals, nesting or foraging along the shore, respond instinctively, creating movement patterns that mirror the geometry of the land and water. Humans, too, learn from these rhythms, adjusting movement, construction, and activity to match predictable patterns in currents, tides, and coastal geometry. Sandbars stretch, shells align, reeds sway slow, waters shine. At dusk, the line of the horizon glows with elongated reflection, blending water and sky. Shadows stretch along the flats, revealing tiny patterns in sand and sediment. Birds roost along predictable edges, fish gather in calm pockets, and humans pause to observe the subtle rhythms of life. Moonlight accentuates linearity, elongating reflections across water and pools, creating a world simultaneously orderly and mesmerizing. Observers, human and animal, learn patience, subtlety, and coordination from these patterns. Moonlight glides, waves extend, shadows fall, currents bend. Standing at the convergence of river and sea, you feel the quiet precision of a flat coastal world. Water moves in long, deliberate lines. Animals respond predictably, humans adapt thoughtfully, and life persists in subtle harmony. The flatness teaches rhythm, observation, and humility. Every elongated reflection, straight current, and predictable wave forms part of a larger story, one in which the geometry of the land and water guides survival, behavior, and imagination in quiet, mesmerizing ways. Currents stretch far, tides flow slow, sand drifts long, waters glow. Without curved terrain, light and shadow behave differently. Trees cast longer, flatter shadows. Inhabitants, human or animal, learn the subtle signs of time, weather, and the passing day. Let's step onto the plains, feeling the soft crunch of dry earth beneath your feet. The air carries faint scents of grass, soil, and distant water. Each gust of wind is noticeable, sweeping across the flat expanse in deliberate, straight paths. Dust lifts from tiny ridges, curling into elongated streaks that stretch across the horizon, emphasizing the vast, uninterrupted landscape. The sun hangs low, casting long, thin shadows that exaggerate subtle rises and depressions in the terrain. Even small tufts of vegetation appear strategically placed, bending in rhythm with the prevailing breezes. Animals move with awareness, their tracks forming parallel lines, a quiet network etched into the flat ground. Dust drifts long, shadows lean, grasses sway, horizons seen. Predators patrol these plains with precision. Wolves, coyotes, and big cats follow predictable paths, scanning for prey across the unobstructed terrain. Prey animals, in turn, learn the linear patterns, moving in straight, synchronized paths to avoid detection. Birds ride the wind in long arcs, wings slicing the air with economy, gliding from one vantage point to another. Insects and small mammals respond to gusts and airflow, adjusting movement subtly to conserve energy and maintain safety. The flat land teaches rhythm, patience, and attentiveness for all living things. A quiet curriculum, written by wind and geometry. Winds drift high, tracks extend, hooves press soft, shadows bend. The wind shapes more than movement. It molds perception. Sounds carry further across the flat expanse. Distant rustles or bird calls amplified in clarity. Early humans would have noticed this, learning to interpret echoes, measure distance, and anticipate movement across miles of open land. Travelers follow faint trails, interpreting the elongated lines of dust, the long shadows of trees or stones, and the subtle variations in wind and sound. Every step is a lesson in observation, spatial awareness, and patience, qualities nurtured by the peculiar linearity of the plains. Sound travels far, dust stretches wide, birds glide low, shadows guide. Even simple tasks are shaped by geometry and wind. Herding animals requires coordination along straight paths. Farming involves careful attention to the line of the horizon, and hunting depends on subtle cues in airflow and shadow. Small variations, a sudden gust, a shifting shadow, or a bent reed signal changes, guiding decisions that might determine success or failure. The landscape teaches attentiveness in a quiet, persistent rhythm, blending the practical and poetic. Grass bends low, hooves trace, dust flows slow, shadows chase, clouds stretch across the sky, mirroring the flatness below. Their shadows cast long bands on the ground, creating moving lines of light and dark that animate the plains. The sun glints along the edges of dust streaks, rocks, and small streams, emphasizing geometry in both color and shadow. Even the faintest incline is noticeable. Every ridge or mound contributes to an invisible grid, guiding movement and observation. Hunters, herders, and wanderers learn to navigate by these visual cues, their awareness sharpened by the linearity of light, shadow, and wind. Clouds drift slow, shadows glide, sunlight cuts, horizon wide. Animals adapt naturally to the wind's guidance. Birds adjust flight paths, mammals track prey along straight corridors, and insects move in patterns, synchronized with gusts. Life itself follows the invisible geometry dictated by air currents, flat land, and the subtle rhythms of sound and light. Observers, human and otherwise, internalize these patterns, learning that survival depends not on brute force, but on subtle attentiveness to the extended cues of the environment. Wings slice air, paws step light, shadows long, dust takes flight. At dusk, the wind softens slightly, but its lessons persist. Dust drifts in slower, elongated lines, shadows stretch further, and the horizon glows in muted golds. Animals settle, humans pause, and the plains seem to exhale, the rhythm of life slowed by the geometry of flatness. Even in quiet contemplation, the wind teaches subtle principles: patience, anticipation, and the quiet poetry of linear movement. Observing this, you feel the interconnectedness of land, air, and life, all responding to the flat, extended patterns that define the plains. Shadows lengthen, dust flows straight, winds sigh soft, plains wait. Standing here, amidst endless lines of sand, grass, and tracks, you perceive the subtle guidance of flat geometry. The plains teach rhythm, distance, and patience. Animals adapt instinctively, humans learn thoughtfully, and the wind carries wisdom in its elongated course. Every element, dust, shadow, breeze, movement, becomes part of a meditative, continuous lesson, revealing the elegance and quiet humor of a world that refuses curves, teaching all who observe the subtle art of living on level, wind-swept land. Plains stretch far, winds drift slow, shadows glide, horizons glow. Ridges and peaks appear differently on flat horizons. Their majesty is not in height alone, but in stretch and distance. Travelers gauge danger, distance, and beauty with new metrics. Let's approach a distant mountain range, feeling the gradual shift in temperature as elevation increases slightly. Though nothing is exaggerated, the air smells faintly of stone, moss, and distant snow, crisp and invigorating. Sunlight spills across ridges in thin, even sheets, highlighting textures that would otherwise blend into the curvature of a globe. Shadows stretch long and straight, exaggerating contours in ways that challenge intuition. Travelers must judge height, distance, and stability differently, relying on subtle cues, the angle of light, the alignment of trees, or the pattern of rock outcrops. Every ridge is a guide, every plateau a measurement tool, teaching patience, observation, and respect for geometry. Ridges stretch far, shadows lean, rocks glint pale, valleys gleam. The mountain's majesty comes from extension rather than height. Peaks are elongated, plateaued, forming lines that seem to march across the horizon. Rivers cascade in long, straight channels rather than winding dramatically. Vegetation clings to terraces in precise bands, following soil and light in patterns dictated by flat geometry. Animals navigate slopes with predictable arcs, learning to anticipate prey or avoid predators using linear cues. Even distant birds trace elongated paths, soaring along ridges that provide consistent updrafts. Travelers measure distance by rhythm and repetition, watching shadows lengthen and shorten across flat expanses. Peaks align, slopes extend, rivers flow straight, shadows bend. Climbing or hiking requires subtle adaptation. Trails follow the ridges in long, unbroken lines, guiding movement and offering predictable footing. Loose stones and subtle crevices are visible because shadows stretch straight across them, revealing details that would otherwise hide. Wind flows along ridges in linear streams, guiding both temperature and sound. Travelers, hikers, or explorers adapt, moving cautiously yet efficiently, observing the geometry and learning to interpret visual and auditory cues in ways previously unnecessary on curved terrain. Rocks glimmer bright, shadows trace, wind hums low, clouds race. From distant vantage points, perspective changes subtly. Peaks closer appear smaller than expected. Distant ridges stretch into the horizon in visually surprising ways. Travelers must calibrate perception differently, balancing intuition with observation. Animals respond similarly. Predators adjust stalking strategies. Herbivores move in straight grazing paths, and birds adjust flight patterns to align with wind and linear slopes. Humans interpret all this behavior, learning survival, timing, and rhythm from geometry itself. Slopes extend wide, shadows glide, peaks stretch far, rivers guide. Sunlight continues its gradual sweep, casting long shadows that reveal subtle undulations in the terrain. A lone tree on a ridge stretches its shadow across the plateau, creating an elongated silhouette that guides both human and animal movement. Rocks and gravel sparkle along straight channels formed by centuries of slow erosion, marking paths and offering orientation. Travelers notice tiny cues, a slight incline, a reflective stone, a bend in a distant stream, each acting as a landmark in the elongated landscape. Sunlight falls straight, shadows lean, peaks align, valleys gleam. Animals continue their quiet navigation. Mountain goats move carefully along extended ledges, finding purchase along predictable paths. Wolves, eagles, and smaller mammals all align movement to the geometry, adjusting instinctively to the flatness and linearity of the terrain. Even insects and small burrowing creatures orient themselves using the subtle cues of light, slope, and wind, forming invisible lines that mirror the mountains above. Humans, watching carefully, learn the same lessons. Observation, patience, and geometry dictate both risk and reward. Claws press light, wings drift far, shadows fall, stars are spar. By evening, the sun tilts low, casting elongated light across ridges and plateaus. Shadows reach impossibly far, flattening the visual field and emphasizing the extended character of the mountains. Travelers pause to observe, breathing in the crisp air, noticing the subtle hues of moss, stone, and distant snow. Animals settle along predictable paths, preparing for the night, guided by the same linear cues humans have learned to interpret. The geometry of flat horizons continues to teach, offering both beauty and caution. Sun dips low, shadows stretch, peaks glow pale, clouds fetch. Standing at the edge of the plateau, you feel the interplay of flat geometry, elongated perspective, and subtle rhythm. Mountains guide movement, shape perception, and influence imagination. Every ridge, peak, and shadow forms part of a meditative landscape, teaching travelers to observe carefully, judge wisely, and appreciate beauty, measured not by height alone, but by the extraordinary stretch and distance of the land. Ridges glow far, shadows bend, peaks extend, journeys blend. Bodies of water reflect flat skies in unusual ways. Perhaps a fish sees straight lines above. Humans gaze and wonder. Calm surfaces amplify the sense that the world is subtly different. Let's approach a lake at dawn, feeling the cool, damp earth beneath your feet. The air smells faintly of moss, algae, and wet stone, layered with the sweet aroma of nearby flowers and grasses. The surface of the water is smooth, unbroken, a perfect mirror stretching across the flat land. Reflections of distant trees, mountains, and clouds appear elongated, almost surreal, emphasizing the linear geometry of both sky and terrain. Light ripples gently across the surface, straight streaks of silver and gold sliding toward the horizon. Birds skim the water, wings cutting arcs that mirror the linearity above. Water glows still, reflections shine, shadows stretch, reeds align. Fish beneath the surface move predictably, following linear paths that mirror the geometry above. Their scales glint in elongated bands of sunlight filtering through the water. Frogs leap in precise arcs, insects skim the surface in synchronized patterns, and small mammals approach the edge cautiously, guided by subtle ripples. Even the wind's faint touch produces perfectly straight disturbances, forming delicate, linear lines across the lake that disappear only gradually. Early humans observing the water would notice these patterns, interpreting reflections, movement, and light as guides, lessons, or inspiration for stories and songs. Ripples glide straight, fish dart low, reeds sway soft, shadows grow. The lake's edges emphasize flatness further. Gentle slopes, barely perceptible, direct water into elongated channels. Pebbles, sand, and plant roots form subtle straight lines that guide movement along the shore. Even the reflection of clouds in the water reinforces the illusion of linearity, amplifying the sense of order and geometry. Travelers, fishermen, and wanderers alike learn to read the lake as a natural instrument, observing subtle cues to predict currents, depth, or hidden obstacles. Shorelines stretch far, water gleams, reeds bend low, fish stream. Sunlight dances across the lake throughout the day, emphasizing unusual geometry. Reflections stretch farther than expected, shadows of distant hills elongated across the water. Ripples align with breeze, while floating leaves, algae, and driftwood form subtle, straight pathways. The flat terrain magnifies perception, creating a meditative environment in which humans and animals alike navigate and learn. Observers notice that even small changes like a shifting cloud or a stray gust of wind carry amplified meaning across the mirrored surface. Sunlight glints, ripples slide, shadows extend, reflections guide. Birds use the lake both as a hunting ground and a visual reference. Their linear flight paths mirror the lake's geometry. Fish leap in parallel arcs, chasing insects or smaller prey. Even distant mammals learn to approach carefully, tracing elongated shadows to anticipate predators. Humans might watch quietly, noting the linearity, recording patterns, and incorporating these observations into early understanding of geometry, movement, and the subtle lessons of a flat world. Birds skim low, shadows trace, reeds sway soft, waters embrace. The calm of evening transforms the lake into a perfect mirror. Sun dips toward the horizon, casting thin, elongated reflections across water. Trees, mountains, and clouds stretch in flattened symmetry, the stillness amplifying every detail. The wind dies down, allowing subtle movements, fish, insects, drifting leaves to create delicate, linear ripples that appear like faint brushstrokes on glass. Observers feel a quiet intimacy with the landscape, the sense of linearity subtly shaping perception and inspiring contemplation. Shadows long, waters gleam, ripples form, light streams, night descends, moonlight gliding across the lake. Stars reflect in elongated patterns, their light doubled in the mirror-like surface. The geometry of the flat world above and below merges, guiding nocturnal animals and human observers alike. Frogs croak, insects hum, and small mammals navigate with instinctive precision. The lake, perfectly flat and reflective, offers lessons in observation, rhythm, and adaptation. Each reflection, shadow, and ripple communicates subtle meaning, reinforcing the meditative rhythm of life in a flat landscape. Moonlight glides, stars extend, shadows stretch, reflections bend. Standing at the edge, you notice the subtle differences in perception. Linear horizons, elongated light, mirrored skies, and gentle ripples. Life, movement, and imagination respond to these cues. The lake is both a teacher and a mirror, reflecting geometry, rhythm, and the quiet humor of a world slightly askew. Observers, whether human or animal, adjust instinctively, learning from elongated reflections, straight ripples, and mirrored horizons. The lake amplifies awareness, patience, and the beauty of flat landscapes, inviting reflection, imagination, and subtle wonder. Reflections stretch far, water flows straight, shadows drift long, night grows late. Animals adapt migration to flatness. Herds move in long linear flows. Birds follow paths aligned with horizon cues. Life learns geometry, even unconsciously. Let's follow a herd of caribou as it travels across a vast plain. Their steps are deliberate and aligned, each animal moving in parallel with its companions. Dust rises in thin, elongated ribbons, stretched far across the horizon. The sun casts long shadows that emphasize subtle undulations in the flat terrain. guiding both movement and perception. Birds glide overhead, wings cutting straight lines across the sky, tracing paths dictated not only by instinct, but by cues from the land and horizon. Every footfall, flap of a wing, and rustle of wind carries information about distance, timing, and the rhythm of the environment. Herds move straight, shadows lean, hooves press soft. Winds keen. Predators also adapt to this linear migration. Wolves, lions, and other carnivores follow predictable straight corridors, learning to anticipate prey movement across the flat terrain. Prey animals, in turn, adjust their behavior, spreading in evenly spaced formations to minimize risk. Even small mammals, insects, and fish learn to navigate linear currents, aligning movement to cues from wind, shadows, and distant shapes. This geometric adaptation is subtle, unconscious, yet profoundly effective. Life itself is guided by the rules of flatness, quietly shaping survival strategies across species. Wings glide far, paws step light, shadows stretch long, day to night. The timing of migration is influenced by elongated cues, sunlight reflecting off rivers, subtle wind shifts, and shadow patterns stretching across plains. Birds, flying high, use horizon markers to maintain precise alignment. Large herds of terrestrial animals follow these cues over weeks or months, covering remarkable distances without deviation. Water sources, vegetation, and seasonal shifts all reinforce these linear paths, creating a natural geometry that governs survival, social structure, and even reproductive success. Shadows extend, winds drift slow, rivers gleam, grasses grow. Observing migration, humans quickly notice patterns. Hunters track herds along elongated corridors, timing ambushes, or gathering resources efficiently. Nomadic communities learn the rhythm of movement, adjusting camps, food preparation, and observation to match the linear flow. Maps, even in primitive form, mirror this flat geometry. Straight pathways stretching across plains, landmarks aligned with horizon cues. Cultural understanding develops around these patterns, blending practicality with observation, story, and myth. Paths extend far, hooves align, dust rises, rivers shine. Migration teaches patience. Days stretch long along flat horizons. Distances feel amplified, and timing becomes essential. Travelers, human and animal alike, internalize subtle cues, changes in light, wind, sound, and shadow. Even the smallest of gestures, an animal's shift in gait, a bird's altered angle provides valuable information. The geometry of the land ensures predictability, allowing observers to anticipate movement and respond effectively. Herds press forward, birds arc high, shadows glide, clouds drift by, rivers and streams subtly guide migration. Water reflects light in long, thin lines, providing visual cues across vast distances. Vegetation forms linear corridors that herds and flocks instinctively follow. Predators adapt to these patterns as well, calibrating hunting strategies to the geometry of the flat landscape. Even storms moving in straight paths influence timing and movement, teaching animals and humans alike about rhythm, observation, and adaptation. Rivers shine straight, winds move slow, reeds sway, animals go. At dusk, the flat horizon casts long, elongated shadows across the migrating herds. Moonlight stretches reflections across rivers and plains, reinforcing linear patterns. Nocturnal animals adjust instinctively, following invisible cues along paths shaped by geometry. Travelers resting along the migration route observe the subtle rhythm of life, learning to predict movement, anticipate changes, and integrate themselves into the flow. Migration becomes both a spectacle and a lesson, a living demonstration of adaptation to a flat world. Moonlight glows, shadows fall, herds advance, night enthrall. Standing at the edge of a plain, watching the linear movement of life, you perceive the quiet teaching of flatness. Each step, wing beat, and rustle communicates geometry, rhythm, and coordination. Animals, humans, and the land itself interact in subtle, extended patterns that guide perception, behavior, and survival. The flat horizon teaches observation, patience, and imagination, reminding you that life learns geometry, even unconsciously, across time, space, and species. Horizon wide, shadows stretch, wings drift slow, herds etch. The passing of seasons feels subtly altered. Sun angles shift gently across flat plains. Snow lingers differently. Rains fall straight. Life marks time in unexpected ways. Let's stand in the center of a vast, open plain, feeling the air change subtly as winter begins to yield to spring. Snow covers the ground in thin, even layers, melting first along subtle ridges and riverbanks. Shadows stretch long across the flat expanse, elongating patches of ice, dirt, and early vegetation. Birds return in linear flight paths, following elongated cues across the horizon, while small mammals emerge from hidden burrows to explore softened soil. The sun drifts gently, its grazing light creating long, narrow streaks that shift gradually, guiding perception of time and temperature across the plains. Shadows lean long, snow glints pale, winds drift slow, rivers trail. Spring arrives unevenly, its rhythm governed by flatness. Rains fall in long sheets, saturating the soil in uniform patterns rather than random splashes. Streams swell predictably, feeding ponds and marshes in subtle, straight channels. Grass shoots upward in evenly spaced clusters, following the linear cues of water flow and sunlight. Observers notice that flowers bloom in subtle gradients, marking the passage of weeks, while animals adjust activity according to elongated cues of temperature, light, and moisture. Early humans or other inhabitants learn to measure time in subtle rhythms, noticing slight changes in shadow, water flow, and air temperature. Rain falls straight, rivers swell, grasses rise, shadows tell. Summer stretches across flat horizons with slow, even heat. Sunlight grazes the land in extended lines, creating patches of warmth and shade that shift subtly but predictably. Trees and shrubs grow in linear corridors, leaves rustling in synchrony with gentle, straight winds. Animals follow elongated paths to water, predators, and prey moving with quiet coordination. Observers mark time by changes in sunlight, color, and shadow, calibrating their daily routines around these subtle yet reliable seasonal cues. Sun arcs low, shadows grow, grasslands sway, breezes flow. Autumn arrives as light angles shift gradually, casting long, stretched shadows across the plains. Leaves change hue in extended gradients, golden, amber, and crimson, stretching in parallel lines across the terrain. Streams narrow as precipitation diminishes, reflecting long shafts of light in mirrored bands. Migrating birds trace elongated paths across the horizon, and small animals prepare for scarcity, following subtle linear cues to food or shelter. Humans observe carefully, adjusting harvests, storing supplies, and marking the subtle passage of time through alignment with shadows and horizon lines. Leaves fall straight, winds drift slow, shadows bend, rivers go. Winter approaches gently. Snow blankets the flat land in unbroken sheets, settling in long, continuous layers. Frost glistens in elongated patterns, stretched by grazing light from low sun angles. Streams freeze in linear channels, reflecting a pale sky. Animals respond to these flattened rhythms, moving efficiently along predictable corridors to find shelter and sustenance. Early observers may have constructed myths or stories to explain these subtle yet striking differences in seasonal rhythm. Life adapts to the flat geometry, embedding a quiet understanding of time and pattern into every movement. Snow lies wide, shadows bend, ice gleams far, rivers send. The interplay of light, wind, and flat terrain subtly informs perception of time. Subtle shifts in the sun's angle, cloud patterns, and the duration of shadows mark the passage of days, weeks, and months. Observers learn to read the land with an awareness both practical and meditative, timing planting and harvest, tracking animal behavior, and interpreting natural cues in alignment with seasonal rhythms. Even playful animals participate, learning to forage, migrate, or rest in patterns that follow the linear cues of light, snow, and water. Shadows stretch long, sunlight flows, clouds drift slow, rivers glow. Nightfall in each season emphasizes geometry. Moonlight casts elongated reflections across snow or water. Stars trace long arcs, and nocturnal animals follow predictable corridors. Life continues in harmony with these subtle cues, demonstrating a quiet mastery of the flat world's rhythms. Humans, standing quietly, notice the passage of time, not in abrupt changes, but in continuous, gentle shifts, guided by elongated light, shadow, and observation. Moonlight glides, shadows lean, rivers gleam, nights serene. In this flat land, seasons are both familiar and subtly altered. Snow, sun, wind, and rain all follow linear rhythms that influence perception, behavior, and culture. Observers, human and animal, learn patience, awareness, and adaptation. Every elongated shadow, straight rain, and grazing sunbeam carries meaning, subtly guiding life across the plains. Time itself feels stretched, measured by geometry, rhythm, and observation, offering a meditative understanding of nature's quiet order. Sun drifts low, shadows fold, rivers stretch, stories told. Finally, we return to ourselves, standing mentally on the expanse, flat horizons, stretched skies, endless light. How would thought, curiosity, and wonder emerge in a world that bends only in imagination? Let's breathe slowly, feeling the calm of this infinite plain. The air carries a faint scent of earth, distant water, and wind-blown grass, layered in subtle nuances that reveal themselves only to those who pause. Shadows stretch endlessly across plains, emphasizing the flatness beneath our feet. The horizon feels impossibly distant, unbroken by hills or mountains, a straight line dividing earth and sky. Light grazes the surface in elongated shafts, soft and warm, moving imperceptibly as the sun continues its slow path. Even the faintest breeze whispers across grasses and scattered rocks, accentuating the rhythm of the land. Shadows stretch wide, light glints low, winds drift soft, plains glow. The sky itself seems to extend infinitely. Clouds drift in gentle, elongated sheets, casting linear shadows across the ground. Birds glide overhead in predictable arcs, wings slicing the air with quiet precision. Insects and small mammals move along invisible lines dictated by flatness, instinctively adjusting to geometry that humans might find strange. The entire world feels synchronized. Each element from wind to water, bird to insect, contributing to a subtle, observable rhythm that teaches patience, attentiveness, and wonder. Clouds drift long, shadows lean, wings slice air, waters gleam. We notice the light reflecting across distant ponds and rivers. Water mirrors the sky in elongated ribbons, stretching perception and blurring the distinction between real and reflected. Fish swim along linear currents, creating patterns that echo above. Even the tiniest movement, a ripple, a fallen leaf, a floating feather, becomes part of a continuous, linear narrative. The flat landscape amplifies every subtle change, inviting observation and contemplation, transforming ordinary movement into lessons in geometry, rhythm, and patience. Ripples glide straight, leaves drift slow, reflections stretch, shadows grow. As we move mentally across the plains, our awareness expands. The uniformity of the terrain emphasizes distance, encouraging focus on subtle variation. Small rises, tufts of grass, lines of stones, and distant water sources become remarkable markers in a sea of straightness. Observing closely, we notice patterns repeated across space: shadows, light, wind, movement. The world teaches us that attention to detail, combined with understanding of geometry, provides both survival and aesthetic insight. Even imagination thrives within this structured simplicity. Grass bends low, shadows sway, stones align, waters play. Life itself follows subtle linear cues. Herds of animals stretch in parallel lines across the plains. Birds fly along predictable paths, and insects navigate using cues from light and horizon. The linearity is both constraining and liberating, guiding movement while opening room for curiosity. Humans observing this would develop ingenuity, storytelling, and myth-making. Tales of distant horizons, unseen lands, and invisible geometry emerge naturally, blending observation with imagination. Every extended shadow, elongated reflection, and straight path reinforces the quiet lessons of living in a flat world. Herds march far, wings cut high, shadows lean, stars spy. Even sound is transformed. Echoes travel further along the flat land, carrying subtle whispers of movement, wind, or conversation. The faintest rustle of grass, a distant call of a bird, or the soft movement of water conveys information across seemingly infinite distances. Humans learn to interpret sound as part of the landscape's linearity, integrating geometry into intuition, memory, and imagination. The world's flatness sharpens perception, cultivating patience, wonder, and subtle humor at the unexpected order embedded in simplicity. Echoes drift long, winds sigh soft, rivers hum, shadows waft. Night arrives with elongated moonlight, stars mirrored across reflective waters. Shadows stretch impossibly far, guiding nocturnal animals and human observers alike. Firelight from distant settlements appears as long, soft bands, cutting across plains in harmony with natural geometry. Observers reflect, realizing that even in a flat, uncurved world, curiosity and wonder are limitless, emerging not from peaks or valleys, but from attention, imagination, and rhythm. Every extended line, shadow, and reflection fosters contemplation, guiding thought as much as survival. Moonlight drifts, stars align, shadows stretch, waters shine. As we stand mentally on the infinite plane, the horizon itself invites reflection. The simplicity of straight lines encourages observation, imagination, and quiet introspection. Life continues across the flat landscape, following subtle geometry that is both practical and poetic. Humans, animals, and plants alike navigate this world, learning patience, awareness, and rhythm. The infinite flatness, though unbending physically, stretches the mind, inspiring stories, questions, and dreams that extend far beyond the horizon. Horizons stretch wide, shadows fall, winds drift slow, waters cool. Here, on this imagined plane, thought, curiosity, and wonder flourish in linear harmony. The world is quiet, structured, and subtly humorous, inviting meditation and observation. Every element, from elongated light to stretched shadows, from linear animal paths to mirrored lakes, teaches, guides, and inspires. Standing at the edge of perception, we are reminded that imagination bends where reality does not, and that understanding, creativity, and wonder thrive even in a world that refuses to curve. Light glows long, shadows bend, winds drift far, horizons send,